Hi guys. Tonight we step into a time when winter meant not just chilly mornings and a need for a thicker coat, but a genuine question of whether you would see the spring. You're standing at the edge of a medieval mountain village, where the air slices like glass and the snow seems endless. The rooftops bend under weighty blankets of white, and the narrow lanes are nothing more than frozen corridors between crooked timber homes. You feel the sting on your cheeks, and you already know without smoke and fire and the huddled strength of community you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you'd like, tell me your location and local time right now in the comments. It's always fun to know where in the world we're keeping each other company. Now, dim the lights and let's wander inside. The first impression as you duck into a mountain hut is not comfort, but confusion of senses. The sudden blast of warmth mingles with heavy smoke, prickling your eyes. A smoky haze hangs thick near the rafters, because chimneys are rare luxuries here. Instead, small holes in the roof or gaps in the walls try their best to drag the smoke away. The hearth dominates the single room, more a pit than a fireplace, its flames fed by precious logs carried from forests far below. The glow is weak, but compared to the cutting cold outside, it feels like stepping into an embrace. You notice how tiny the interior is, just 1 or 2 rooms, and all family life folded into this smoky womb. The walls lean inward, patched with clay and moss, while animal hides drape across doorways to keep out drafts. Villagers have no spare space, so children, parents, and elders share not just the hearth, but every breath of air. Privacy is non-existent. Survival erases such concerns. A historical fact to settle you. Records from alpine villages show that during the harsh winters of the 14th century, even prosperous families crowded into single smoky rooms because heating multiple chambers was impossible. Firewood took days of labor to cut, and most forests were controlled by lords who taxed every bundle. Now for the quirky tidbit: look down near the hearth and you'll see chickens scuttling freely inside, scattering straw with their claws. Some families let small animals roam their huts not only for the body heat, but because eggs were safer close at hand than outside in the bitter dark. Yes, your pillow might be shared with a hen. And historians still argue whether these huts were truly as suffocating as the later travel writers described. Some insist the smoke vented well enough. Others claim the blackened beams and constant coughs suggest generations half-choked through every winter. The truth likely flickers somewhere in between. As you stand there, your clothes soak in the heavy scent of wood and tallow. The flickering light draws shadows across children bundled near the fire. They cough occasionally, cheeks ruddy but eyes bright. A woman stirs a pot of broth, its steam cutting briefly through the smoke, and teasing you with smells of barley and cabbage. Each spoonful is thin, but hot, and in these huts, heat is worth more than flavor. You shuffle toward a rough bench. Your fingers brush its surface, gritty with ash. The warmth is uneven, the side facing the fire toasty, the other cold enough to numb. You think about how villagers lived in this rhythm constantly, twisting their bodies like plants towards sunlight, soaking up every ember's energy before it fades. At night, when the flames burned low, the hut turned into a shared cocoon. Straw mattresses lined the floor, sometimes with fur piled above them. Families huddled shoulder to shoulder, layering blankets, clothes, and even cloaks over their sleeping forms. Imagine the muffled symphony snoring men, fussing babies, the occasional grunt from a pig in the corner. It was messy, loud, and yet, in its own way, reassuring. The sound of many bodies meant survival. Your eyes travel upward to the rafters, where herbs dangle like strange decorations. Their silhouettes sway slightly in the draft. Some are for medicine, some for cooking, and some simply to mask the stench of smoke and sweat. You notice one bunch tied with red string believed to chase away frost spirits. Whether you believe in them or not, when the snow piles higher than your door, you're willing to keep a charm nearby. The floor beneath your feet crunches with dried rushes spread like carpeting. Villagers replace them occasionally, but through the season they become damp and fragrant with everything life inside entails. That earthy smell clings to you, even as your skin dries and your lips crack in the constant heat and cold cycle. Pause a moment. You are not simply visiting, you are living their life for tonight. Imagine pulling off your boots, feeling toes stiff from frost. You extend them toward the hearth, the heat prickling painfully at first, almost unbearable, before slowly thawing your bones. Relief washes in, but the dread lingers. Tomorrow, you will step out into drifts again. One of the children looks at you, eyes wide. He points to the corner where an iron pot is buried halfway into the ashes. It's filled with stones, heated by the fire earlier. Later, these stones will be wrapped in cloth and tucked into the bedding to offer a few hours of lingering warmth. Without them, the long alpine night would be harsher than any of us today could tolerate. Do you feel the weight of their days? Each log of wood is weighed like gold, each ember stretched, each draught blocked with rags or moss. It is not a life of comfort, but of constant bargaining with the elements. And yet, in this smoky room, with laughter of children cutting through coughs, there is a quiet triumph. Step outside once more. The shock of cold returns instantly. The hut behind you glows faintly, a tiny lantern against an enormous darkness. You hear the crunch of snow, the faint barking of dogs, the whisper of wind through bare trees. Villagers hurry between houses, heads bent, carrying buckets or armloads of wood. Life does not pause for the weather, it reshapes itself around it. And so you drift along the lane, following smoke that curls upward like beacons. Ahead, another hut waits, another family guarding its warmth. Tomorrow you'll step inside again. For now, let the vision linger. Crooked timber walls, smoke pressing downward, children nestled together, and fire the frail, stubborn center of their world. You step forward from the smoky glow of the hut and deeper into the frozen lane. The night air gnaws at your skin, but before long you're invited into another doorway. Inside, you're struck by the sight of heavy layers, wool upon wool, fur upon fur, villagers wrapped like living bundles. It's a reminder that fire alone is never enough here. You need to wear your hearth on your back. Wool, in particular, is king. Sheep are everywhere in these mountain regions, and their fleece is transformed into coarse tunics, thick hose, and long cloaks. You slip your fingers along a sleeve and feel the scratch of homespun yarn. It isn't soft by modern standards, but it traps air, forming a barrier that holds precious heat. Children wear smaller versions, their garments patched again and again until almost nothing of the original fabric remains visible. And over this, villagers throw animal skins, fox, goat, rabbit, anything that can be caught and cured. The smell of lanolin and animal fat hangs heavy. Every garment carries the memory of its creature origin. Boots are lined with fur and stuffed with straw for insulation. Mittens stitched from scraps dangle at belts, ready to be pulled on when frostbite threatens. Some hats even have flaps tied down beneath the chin, a medieval precursor to what you might now call a trapper's cap. Practicality, not elegance, rules the day. A mainstream fact settles in your thoughts. In many mountain villages of the Alps, sumptuary laws existed not to regulate luxury, but to enforce the wearing of wool. Authorities recognized that survival depended on it, so fines could be given if villagers wasted their fleece for frivolous decoration instead of warmth. Imagine a world where failing to wear enough wool was not merely unwise, it was unlawful. For the quirky tidbit, picture this. Some women, lacking proper outer layers, sewed dried moss or even bird feathers into the lining of their clothing. You might laugh at the absurd image of someone waddling about with feathers poking out, but think again, every extra pocket of trapped air meant one less chance of freezing. Ingenuity mattered more than fashion. And historians still argue whether medieval layering techniques genuinely kept people warm or whether much of it was psychological comfort. Was the average peasant in several patched tunics actually warm, or were they just less miserable? Archaeological textile finds show multiple thicknesses, but debates continue about how effective they truly were in mountain blizzards. Look around the hut now. You notice how clothing isn't neatly stored away. Garments hang close to the fire, steaming lightly, drying from the damp that clings to every step outside. Gloves are stretched near the embers, boots tilted sideways so melted snow drips into a trough below. The constant rhythm is this: wear, dampen, dry, repeat. The cycle never ends until spring. Imagine the feeling. You rise at dawn, your outer cloak stiff with frost from the night, but you wrap it around yourself anyway. The first step outdoors bites, but once you begin moving, hauling wood, tending goats, carrying water, your layers trap the heat of your exertion. You sweat a little, and the wool holds it, a damp reminder that survival is rarely comfortable. A young girl approaches, her cloak patched with colourful threads. At first you think it's decorative, but she giggles as she explains each patch came from a different garment too small for her now. Her entire cloak is a quilt of history, every stitch telling of winters past. You trace the rough seams, marvelling at the resilience in every line of thread. You sit by the hearth again, and a man offers you a cap made of sheepskin. You pull it over your ears, and instantly the world feels muted, as if sound itself softens. The warmth is startling. For a moment, you allow yourself to imagine sleeping like this, wrapped in layers so thick you can barely move, but safe from the frost gnawing at your bones. The villagers share stories of travelers unprepared for these mountains. They laugh gently at nobles from the lowlands who came dressed in finery velvets and silks that looked grand but offered no insulation. Many of those travelers didn't survive the first storm. Here, luxury is not what shines but what shields. You glance toward the door, where a bundle of pelts hangs drying. The scent is sharp, raw. These will become lining for coats or perhaps a blanket stitched roughly together. Nothing is wasted. Even sinew from animal legs is twisted into thread, strong enough to hold layers of fur in place. You can almost hear the scraping sound of knives across hides, the rhythm of needles piercing tough skins. Your mind drifts back to the cold outside. Without these layers, you'd last minutes, maybe less. Your toes would stiffen, your breath crystallize, your skin crack open under wind. With them, you may grumble about itch and weight, but you live, and in the end, isn't survival its own form of elegance? Reflect too on the modern irony. You sit at home perhaps with a closet full of coats and yet rarely need them. Here, one or two garments determine whether a family sees another year. Imagine the nightly prayers whispered over a cloak mended for the 10th time. Imagine the gratitude when a newborn sheep meant not only food, but another layer of warmth for next winter. The fire crackles, and you lean back, feeling your cloak press against your body like a second skin. Outside, the snow drifts higher, but inside, wrapped in wool, you find a fragile sense of safety. Tomorrow you will see how they sleep, but tonight, let the scratch of wool, the heavy musk of fur, and the sight of patched cloaks swaying in firelight stay with you. You wake to the muffled hush of dawn, the kind of silence only snow can bring. The air inside the hut is heavy and cool, the embers of last night's fire glowing faintly red. As you shift under a heap of coarse blankets and animal pelts, you realize something else is working quietly to keep you alive: the bed itself. Straw is the foundation. Villagers gather it in the autumn, stack it carefully, and spread it out to form thick pallets. The rustling stalks create a cushion against the frozen ground. You lie back and hear the faint crunch, a reminder that luxury mattresses are centuries away. Instead, straw is stuffed into linen sacks or heaped in wooden frames, flattened night after night, replaced when dampness or pests make them unbearable. Contemporary monastic records describe how even abbeys used straw bedding for novices and guests, noting the comfort of the humble stalks. It's telling that wealthier institutions allowed their members to refresh straw frequently, while peasants often endured the same bedding for months. Imagine the smell after a long winter of sweat, smoke, and dampness absorbed into the fibers. What adds charm and a dose of strangeness are the hot stones. Heated near the hearth, they are wrapped in cloth or tucked into iron pots, then slipped beneath blankets. At first, the heat is almost painful, radiating into frozen limbs, but gradually it becomes a cherished, fading warmth. There are even accounts of people naming their favorite stones, treating them like small companions of survival. Scholarly opinion is divided about how effective these makeshift warmers truly were. Some argue the stones often cooled too quickly to be practical. Others point to oral traditions praising them as essential for enduring the coldest nights. The truth may lie somewhere between imperfect, but better than nothing when the wind howled through every crack. You pull a fur-lined cloak tighter, but notice something furry at your feet. It shifts and sighs. Dogs, cats, and sometimes goats were deliberately invited to share the bed. Their body heat mattered more than notions of hygiene. Children especially snuggled against animals, learning early that warmth comes in many forms. The steady heartbeat of a pet against your legs was as good as any modern hot water bottle. Your senses fill with the textures of this world, the itch of straw poking through a thin sheet, the oily musk of animal hides, the surprising weight of a quilt patched from scraps of old garments. Sleep is rarely deep, often interrupted by coughs, snoring, or the cries of infants. Yet somehow, in this crowded bed, families endured together. One curious custom recorded by travelers describes peasants laying stones directly in the ashes of the hearth, then carrying them upstairs in wooden tongs to tuck into bedding. Occasionally, sparks clung to the stone, setting straw alight. Entire villages told stories of bedding fires, reminders that every comfort carried its dangers. As dawn brightens, you hear a rooster crow from the corner of the room, yes, inside. Feathers stir, and the smell of damp straw grows stronger. You stretch beneath your pile of coverings, grateful for the patchwork fortress around you. In this place, sleep is not about dreams, it is about survival. You rise slowly, brush straw from your hair, and step toward the doorway. Outside, the snow sparkles like powdered glass. Ahead lies the rhythm of the day, but the memory of your straw bed, the faint warmth of hidden stones, and the sigh of animals pressed close will travel with you into the cold. The door creaks open, and another gust of icy air follows you inside a neighboring dwelling. This time, the center of the room draws your eyes immediately. It isn't a bed, nor the piles of clothing drying on the walls. It is the fire itself. A shallow pit lined with stones glows with embers, and a slow flame licks upward as someone feeds it carefully with kindling. The hearth is the pulse of the household, a fragile, smoky miracle that makes the difference between life and death. You crouch near it, feeling the heat radiate in uneven waves. Too close, and your skin prickles uncomfortably, but step a foot back, and the air cools sharply. This unevenness means families constantly shuffle and reposition throughout the day. A child wriggles closer with a blanket over his shoulders, while an elder retreats coughing, eyes red from the smoke. Written accounts from the 13th century describe how many alpine homes lacked chimneys altogether. Instead, smoke drifted upward and collected beneath the thatched or wooden roofs. Soot-blackened beams are still visible in archaeological remains, showing how entire generations lived under ceilings painted by smoke. These rafters often acted as curing racks. 2 hams, sausages, and fish hung above the fire, absorbing not just the heat but the pungent aroma of wood smoke. It was preservation by accident and design, nourishment suspended in clouds. You draw in a breath, and your lungs sting a little. The acrid tang clings to your tongue. For villagers, this sensation is constant. Eyes water, noses run. But without fire there is no boiling water, no baked bread, no heat at all. So, smoke becomes a tolerated companion, shaping the smell of clothing, hair, and skin. Some travelers later complained that mountain peasants smelled permanently of burnt oak. You can almost nod along in sympathy. One unusual practice in some regions involved deliberately banking the fire under piles of ash before sleep. In the morning, families dug into the mound, exposing faint embers still alive, ready to reignite with a breath. Matches didn't exist, Flint and steel could be coaxed to spark. But why waste effort when you could smother and preserve yesterday's flame? These sleeping fires became as precious as any treasure. If the last ember died in a stormy night, households sometimes sent children running with clay pots to a neighbor's hut to beg for a glowing coal. Imagine the relief of carrying that tiny, glowing gift back through the snow. Researchers remain divided on how much smoke damage villagers suffered over a lifetime. Some argue respiratory diseases were rampant, while others note that the average life expectancy was already shortened by hunger and illness, making long-term lung damage harder to measure. But you don't need a debate to know your eyes burn after just a few minutes here. The hearth also serves as a social magnet. Women kneel close to spin wool, hands working in the dim light. Men sharpen tools against the stones, sparks occasionally flying and blending with the embers. Children are scolded for leaning too near, but the temptation is great. Warmth is strongest there. Storytelling circles gather around flames in the evenings, tales rising with the smoke. And of course, cooking defines its rhythm. A pot bubbles, suspended on an iron hook. Inside, root vegetables soften into broth, the scent mingling with the fire until it feels like part of the air itself. As you watch, a boy tosses a handful of dried herbs onto the fire. The flames flare briefly, releasing a fragrant burst. This isn't waste, it's ritual. Families believed certain herbs purified the air or drove away spirits that crept in during the darkest months. A flicker of lavender or sage was thought to guard the family as much as warm them. Your senses sharpen. The crackle of logs, the hiss of sap boiling inside the wood, the pop of resin bursting. Each sound is a reminder that wood isn't endless. Families measure each log carefully, stretching supplies until spring. In many regions, lords controlled forest rights, forcing villagers to pay dearly for every bundle of branches. Those who stole wood risked harsh punishment, so each flame you see is political as well as personal. There's another curiosity. Many households kept small fire, dogs or iron stands shaped with decorative heads, sometimes dragons, sometimes lions. These weren't just functional, they carried symbolic meaning. To guard the hearth with a beast of iron was to announce resilience, a household's stubborn refusal to be extinguished. Some remains of such objects have been found buried alongside their owners, tokens of warmth even in the grave. Night falls. You watch how carefully they manage the fire now. Large logs are set aside, split in advance, reserved for the coldest hours. Families judge the temperature by instinct when the roof beams creak with frost. It's time to feed the hearth generously. Otherwise, smaller sticks suffice. Fire is rationed like food. You lean back and notice how the fire's glow paints faces. Wrinkles deepen in the flicker, eyes glisten with reflections. It is hypnotic, and you realize how much of life revolves around this pit of light. Without it, the hut would be an icebox. With it, laughter and arguments, prayers and lullabies all find their stage. Step away for a moment. Outside, you glance through cracks in wooden walls and see dozens of smoke plumes rising above the village. Each column curls into the night sky, drifting, merging, becoming one dark canopy. From afar, the whole settlement appears stitched together by fire. Inside each home, a family guards their ember. Together, they weave survival against the cold. Tomorrow, you will discover how the very shape of these homes and villages grew from the need to hold that warmth close. But tonight, remember the hearth, the smoky, coughing, flickering heart of medieval mountain life. Without it, nothing else you have seen so far would matter. You step away from the hearth and out into the biting air again, your cloak already stiffening from the frost. The more you wander, the more you notice a pattern. These mountain villages are shaped not by luxury, not by grand design, but by the relentless need to keep people alive in cold so harsh it seeps into bone. Buildings cluster tightly, like frightened animals huddled together. Narrow lanes twist and turn, less like planned streets and more like windbreaks carved by necessity. When you look at the map of such a village, it feels almost defensive. In fact, some scholars suggest the layout resembles a fortress not because of war, but because of winter. By pressing houses close together, villagers shared walls, reduced the number of surfaces exposed to icy gusts, and sheltered each other from the storm. You can feel the effect now. Walk into the heart of the settlement, and the wind slackens, muffled by overlapping timber and stone. Step out toward the edge, and the gale lashes at your face again. Monastic chronicles from the 12th century note how entire hamlets in the Alps or Carpathians were rebuilt after avalanches. When they rose again, they packed themselves even closer, sometimes with barely enough space to drive a cart between houses. It was survival through density. Less space for carriages meant less exposure to deadly winds. There's a detail that makes you smile in disbelief. In some villages, roofs sloped steeply inward, almost touching one another, so snow could pile between them like a shared insulating blanket. Imagine rooftops leaning into each other like neighbors clasping hands against the cold. From above, it must have looked like a strange, jagged puzzle pressed tight. And yet, the debate lingers among historians. Were these cramped lanes deliberate climate adaptation, or simply the product of limited land and resources? Some argue geography alone forced this compactness. Others counter that villagers clearly understood the value of huddled structures, pointing to patterns repeating across mountain ranges far apart from each other. Perhaps both are true necessity and instinct combining into a single architectural language. Step with me into one of these lanes. You hear the crunch of snow under boots, the echo of voices bouncing between walls. The narrowness traps sounds as well as warmth. You notice how wooden shutters slam shut quickly, sealing in heat. Beneath your feet, the ground is slick, not just from ice, but from decades of trodden paths, polished hard by countless steps. Horses or donkeys sometimes pass, snorting steam, but their size barely fits. Look up, and you'll see why roofs are so sharply pitched. Heavy snow slides off instead of collapsing the timbers. Still, avalanches remain a constant fear. Villagers recount how entire homes vanished beneath roaring drifts. To counter this, some settlements built low stone walls uphill, crude but effective barriers to divert smaller slides. These little fortifications speak volumes about ingenuity born of desperation. The air inside the clustered heart of the village feels different. There's a faint warmth that lingers, the collective heat of dozens of hearths rising, seeping into the walls, trapped between the close buildings. It is subtle, you'd freeze without layers, but compared to the outskirts you sense the difference. Even the wind dares not howl as fiercely here. One curious practice noted by travelers. Sometimes the upper floors of neighboring houses were linked by wooden bridges, so people could move between homes without stepping into the snow. These passageways were practical during blizzards and doubled as symbols of community. They turned entire rows of dwellings into a single interconnected hive. Imagine being able to visit your neighbor for bread or salt while never setting foot outdoors in a storm. You notice too that public spaces, small squares, wells, chapels are tucked deep inside the protected core. The well is covered with a heavy roof, preventing ice from sealing the water. The chapel, though unheated, stands where villagers can gather without braving the open valley. Everything bends toward one principle: minimize exposure, maximize survival. There is something almost animalistic in this design. Villages resemble dens, warrens, nests, and perhaps that's the point. Humans here didn't aspire to sprawling beauty, they aspired to mimic creatures that survived better in the cold by clustering. You can almost hear a whisper from the walls themselves: stay close, don't stray. Together you endure. Step back for a moment. Picture yourself viewing this village from a hill. A cluster of wooden roofs bristling against snow, smoke weaving upward into the white sky, lanes curling tightly like veins around a heart. It isn't pretty in the modern sense. It is raw, cramped, smoky. Yet there is a quiet magnificence, the magnificence of people shaping space to outwit nature. Think too about the long-term impact. Many such villages grew into towns, And traces of this survival design lingered centuries later. Narrow alleys, tight-knit housing, and steep roofs became cultural signatures, admired now for charm but once born of necessity. When you walk through preserved medieval quarters in Europe today and marvel at their intimacy, remember that it was once not about romance, but about life itself. The snow thickens as you stand in the middle of this clustered maze. Children dart between houses, their laughter muffled by fur hoods. A woman carries firewood, her shoulders bent, her figure dwarfed by tall walls pressing inward. A dog trots close behind, leaving prints that quickly vanish in new snow. For a moment, you close your eyes and listen. The wind's roar softens here, replaced by the low hum of community life pots clanging, voices calling, animals shifting in stalls. The village breathes as one organism, pulsing gently against the cold. When you open your eyes, you feel a strange warmth in your chest, not from fire or clothing, but from the recognition of human stubbornness. These villagers carved safety from architecture, shaped protection from density, and built their world like fortress walls, except their enemy was the mountain itself. Soon, you will explore what fuels their bodies in this endless freeze. But as you leave these twisted lanes, remember the sight. Houses packed like soldiers, roofs bending together, alleys curling like lifelines. This is how medieval mountain people survived, by becoming their own fortress against the cold. The village presses close behind you, its clustered homes shielding you for a moment from the sharp wind, but soon you step toward a wooden doorway, lured by the smell of cooking. Inside, a family bends over a heavy pot, stirring slowly. Your stomach clenches. The smell is not rich or savory, but plain and earthy barley, root vegetables, maybe a sliver of meat if luck has been kind. This is the diet of the mountains, carved by necessity, and it is as much about endurance as it is about taste. A sack of barley rests by the hearth, its grains dull but reliable. Barley thrives where wheat does not, in poor soil and shorter growing seasons. Chroniclers from the 14th century note that mountain folk relied on barley bread daily, often so coarse that travellers compared it to chewing bark. Yet, bite by bite, it kept bodies alive. To soften the hardness, villagers dipped the bread into hot broth, letting steam moisten the crust before swallowing. You notice strips of dried fish hanging above the fire, their leathery forms curled by smoke. Lakes and rivers in lower valleys provided catches during warmer months, preserved by salting and drying. These tough morsels reappeared in winter stews, softened after hours of simmering. What you taste is not luxury, but a memory of summer caught in every bite. There's a curious custom worth pausing on. Some families dried turnip slices into brittle chips, storing them in sacks. When boiled, they returned to a soft, if somewhat sour, texture. It may sound meager, but travellers' accounts describe children gnawing on these dried turnip wafers like treats. In a world of scarcity, even a shriveled root could feel like candy. Scholarly opinion diverges on whether mountain diets provided enough nutrition to prevent deficiency. Some argue the constant reliance on barley and preserved foods led to chronic malnutrition, while others point out the clever use of wild greens and occasional hunting balanced the gaps. The debate endures, though what cannot be denied is that many winters ended with weakened bodies, even among survivors. In the corner, a pot bubbles gently, releasing a scent both faint and comforting. It's pottage, an eternal stew that never truly ends. Families kept it simmering day after day, tossing in whatever scraps they had. A carrot here, a strip of pork fat there, a pinch of dried herbs. You dip a wooden spoon and taste the history of the week, layers of flavor built from the village's survival. One traveler once wrote, half in awe, half in disgust, that the pot of the mountaineer holds a broth as old as the house itself. Meat is rare. A goat might be slaughtered for a festival, or a sheep too injured to keep. Fresh meat in the dead of winter is almost unthinkable. Instead, villagers gnaw dried strips of jerky, softened in broth, or nibble sausages cured months ago. Every bite is measured, every portion stretched. Hunger lingers, a constant shadow. You run your hand across the table, feeling the grooves worn deep from years of knives chopping the same humble foods. A bowl of dried beans rests there, hard as pebbles. These will be soaked overnight, then boiled into mush. Beans were hardy, storing well through winter, though stories tell of children groaning at the monotony of endless bean stews. There's also the comfort of cheese. Herds grazed in alpine pastures during warmer months, their milk transformed into wheels of hard cheese that could last for months, sometimes years. You bite into a crumbly piece, salty and sharp, a burst of life in the bland winter diet. Some sources describe wheels of cheese stored as dowries, prized as much as gold. Imagine marrying with a wheel of cheese as your fortune. Even drink plays its role. A jug of thin ale stands near the hearth, brewed from barley, weak but nourishing. Water is often unsafe. Ale, though low in alcohol, carries fewer risks and a bit of warmth in the belly. A sip leaves a faint tang, not unpleasant. Picture now the rhythm. Every meal is some variation of bread, broth, and whatever can be stretched to flavor it. Yet within this monotony lies ritual. Families sit close, share from a common pot, and whisper gratitude for every bite. Hunger binds them as surely as warmth does. One odd detail travelers recorded. In some regions, villagers boiled pine needles into broth, believing it kept away coughs and provided strength. Modern science later revealed pine needles carry vitamin C, so perhaps this strange-tasting tea truly saved lives. Who would have thought the forest itself offered a remedy in a teacup? As the family eats, the children's cheeks glow, not from richness of food, but from the heat of broth against the chill. Their laughter bubbles between bites, a reminder that even plain fare can bring joy when shared. You dip again into the pot and swallow. The taste may be simple, but it lingers with surprising comfort, warming your chest as the fire cannot. Outside, snow continues to fall, thick and steady. The scent of barley clings to your breath as you step away. Ahead, you will discover what villagers drink to chase away not only hunger but cold itself. But for now, remember the feel of rough bread, the steam of endless pottage, and the resilience hidden in every mouthful. You leave behind the steaming pot of pottage, but the warmth lingers in your belly as you walk into another dim hut. Here, the air feels different, richer, carrying the faint scent of honey, yeast, and something sharp. On the table, a clay jug rests half empty, a wooden ladle beside it. You're about to discover how drink became another form of insulation, a liquid blanket against nights when frost pushed its way under every door. The villagers beckon you closer. A woman pours a small cup of cloudy ale, pale and foamy. You sip, and the taste is both bitter and bread-like. The unmistakable flavor of barley fermented just enough to cheer but not overwhelm. In these mountains, beer is rarely strong, alcohol is too precious to squander on high potency. Instead, it is weak, nutritious, and endlessly consumed. Children drink it too, though their portion is lighter, for it's often safer than water drawn from streams laced with animal waste. Chroniclers from German-speaking regions in the late Middle Ages described how families brewed in small batches, using whatever grain they could spare. Sometimes rye or oats joined the mash, resulting in unpredictable flavors. Brewing wasn't a luxury, it was a chore like spinning wool or cutting wood. Each household guarded its yeast strains like family secrets, passing them down through generations. But ale wasn't the only drink on offer. Honey, wine, or mead made rare appearances. Imagine the delight when a jar of thick honey, harvested during warmer months, could be spared for fermentation. Mead shimmered golden in the firelight, sweet and potent, and was often reserved for feast days or ritual blessings. Travelers recorded astonishment at how even the poorest peasants could produce a beverage fit for kings when bees had been generous. One curious habit described in village tales. People sometimes warmed ale or mead with herbs before drinking, especially in the dead of winter. Cinnamon, if trade routes had delivered it, was a miracle spice, though more often locals relied on juniper berries, sage, or rosemary. The steaming drink acted less like a treat and more like a medicine, soothing sore throats, easing coughs, and dulling the cold gnawing at bones. Historians remain divided on whether these brews actually provided significant warmth or only the illusion of it. Alcohol dilates blood vessels, creating a false flush of heat while the body actually cools. Some argue this habit was dangerous, making villagers more vulnerable outdoors. Others suggest that in moderation, the psychological comfort outweighed the risks. After all, when your world is snow-choked and endless, sometimes comfort is survival itself. A jug of darker liquid catches your eye. Apple cider, sharp and tart. Apples were stored through autumn, pressed into juice, and fermented quickly before they spoiled. In some valleys, cider replaced ale entirely, its acidity a bracing counter to fatty, preserved foods. Sip it, and your tongue tingles. It's easy to see why villagers might gather around a jug and let their worries blur for an evening. There's also the stranger concoctions, half medicine, half drink. Elderberry wine boiled with honey, nettle teas laced with ale, or even pine needle infusions blended with beer. Folk memory speaks of one practice where garlic cloves were steeped in weak wine, believed to heat the blood. You wrinkle your nose, but when frostbite threatens, taste becomes secondary to survival. Listen closely, and you hear laughter. A group of men sit cross-legged near the hearth, sharing a jug. Their cheeks flush red, and for a moment the hut feels warmer, filled with jokes and song. Alcohol doesn't just numb the cold, it creates a circle of camaraderie, a bubble of joy against the bleak night. One man strums a string instrument, another hums a ballad. You can almost feel the walls expand with their voices. Step outside with your cup. The wind bites again, but the glow in your chest holds. From other huts, you hear similar bursts of laughter, songs tumbling into the snow-heavy silence. The entire village drinks not to forget hunger, but to transform it, to turn necessity into moments of lightness. You reflect on the rhythm. Weak ale daily, mead rarely, cider if apples grew well, herbal brews when illness struck. This variety isn't about indulgence, it's a patchwork of strategies, each sip a thread in the fabric of endurance. Even the smallest cup could mean the difference between despair and determination. Tomorrow you'll step closer to the hearth again, not for drink, but to see how children and elders, the most fragile of all, were swaddled and protected. But for now, hold on to the taste. Honey's sweetness, barley's bitterness, apple's tart sting, and the faint flush of warmth spreading through your frozen veins. The cup of mead still lingers in your memory, a warm ghost in your chest, but as you wander into another hut, the focus shifts. This time, it is not the men at the table or the women spinning yarn who hold your attention, but the smallest and the oldest. Children giggle near the hearth, bundled into layers so thick they look like tiny parcels. In the shadows, an elder coughs softly, wrapped in furs that sag around narrow shoulders. In this coldest of worlds, these two groups, those at the very start of life and those nearing its end, are the most fragile, and the care lavished upon them is both practical and tender. The first thing you notice is the swaddling. Babies are wrapped tightly in linen strips, then layered with wool or fur until they resemble little cocoons. Travellers in the 15th century remarked with some amazement at how mountain infants were bound as if for war against the air itself. The tightness kept limbs warm, but also, some believed, prevented crooked growth. Mothers tucked warm stones, wrapped in cloth, beneath the swaddled child's feet, while older siblings sat nearby to ensure no ember sparked the blankets. Children old enough to toddle wore tunics that nearly brushed the floor, their sleeves so long their hands barely emerged. Little hoods, sometimes lined with rabbit fur, framed their round faces. The garments were not cute in the modern sense, they were bulwarks, miniature armor against frost. Archaeological textile fragments found in alpine graves show surprisingly sophisticated stitching for such tiny clothes, evidence that enormous effort went into clothing those least able to bear the cold. But it wasn't only fabric that guarded them. One peculiar practice involved cradle boards, padded with straw and hung near the hearth. Babies rocked gently in the smoky warmth, their noses peeking from layers of cloth. Some accounts even describe goats tethered nearby, their steady warmth radiating toward the cradle. Imagine that your first bedmate, not another child, but a patient farm animal. Researchers disagree on whether these smoky environments harmed or helped infants. Some argue that constant exposure to fumes weakened tiny lungs, while others suggest the smoke killed bacteria and deterred insects, offering a kind of crude protection. Perhaps, as so often, survival was a compromise. Fewer fevers, but more coughs. Turn now to the elders. The oldest villagers sat nearest the fire, given the places of honor not just out of respect but necessity. Joints stiff with age and lungs weakened by years could not withstand draughts. You see one old woman, her fingers knotted with arthritis, wrapping wool around her legs again and again. Beside her, a man leans on a stick, sipping slowly from a cup of broth. Their presence is quiet but commanding. The family orbits around them, balancing chatter and chores with subtle glances to ensure they are warm. Curious habits arise here too. Some villages used warming chairs, crude wooden seats with compartments beneath for hot stones or embers. Elders sat on these glowing thrones, their faces illuminated by faint heat rising from below. A traveling monk once wrote, half in wonder, that the grey ones sit upon fire itself, as if their bodies are altars. The description may be poetic, but you can picture the comfort such an invention brought. A softer detail catches your heart. Children and elders often slept side by side. Parents arranged the bedding so little ones were pressed between grandparents, wrapped in double warmth. Oral traditions recall lullabies sung in rough, low voices, tales whispered as children drifted to sleep against wrinkled arms. Survival here was not solitary, it was layered, one fragile body lending heat to another. Of course, dangers lurked. Cold-related deaths among infants and the elderly were common, though rarely recorded formally. Folklore fills the gaps instead. Some tales speak of winter spirits, stealing babies in storms, metaphors for sudden illness. Others whisper of old men wandering into the snow, called by the mountain, a poetic framing of hypothermia. Behind the myths lies the painful truth. The weakest often slipped away in the harshest months. Yet joy persisted. Children, even wrapped like tiny mummies, found ways to play. They chased each other around the hearth, their laughter bright against the smoky gloom. Elders, for their part, told stories, legends of saints who warmed villages with miracles, or beasts that prowled the forests in search of careless wanderers. These tales carried wisdom disguised as entertainment. Stay near the fire. Guard your ember. Share warmth. One unusual remedy you hear whispered involves garlic cloves tucked into children's boots to heat their blood during walks. The sharp smell filled the air, but parents believed it warded frostbite. Modern science hints at antimicrobial properties in garlic, so perhaps the superstition held some hidden truth. Another oddity: goose fat rubbed onto babies' skin before wrapping them, thought to lock in warmth. You shudder slightly at the image, but acknowledge the desperate creativity. The role of care extended beyond family. Villages often rallied when children were born or when elders grew too frail. Neighbors brought food, extra firewood, or clothing. In such an unforgiving world, community was the only true safety net. Even the smallest child or the frailest elder contributed in quieter ways, carrying stories, singing songs, binding generations together through shared nights by the fire. As you watch, an old man begins a low chant, his voice weaving through the smoky room. Children listen, eyes wide. His tale speaks of winters past, of storms fiercer than this, of how their ancestors endured. You realize that in his rasping breath lies a gift greater than food, memory, the preservation of endurance itself. You step outside, the sound of that chant following you into the frosty air. You glance back at the hut and picture children bundled like parcels, elders draped in furs, hearts beating together against the cold. Tomorrow you'll see how work, endless and exhausting, also doubled as survival's exercise. But tonight, carry this image with you, the tender balance of protecting the smallest flames of life, guarding both cradle and cane in the coldest mountain villages. The night has passed, and you rise again with the pale winter light. Your legs ache a little from the chill, but soon you notice something that keeps the villagers alive almost as surely as fire and food: movement. In these mountains, the cold is so relentless that stillness itself is dangerous. Work is not just survival in terms of tasks accomplished. It is survival in the way it keeps blood pumping, muscles burning, and spirits just warm enough to endure. Step outside with me. The snow crunches hard beneath boots, and immediately you see figures bent over their duties. A shepherd pushes against the wind, his cloak flapping as he guides a flock toward a sheltered valley. Goats bleat, their breath steaming in the frosty air. The shepherd's staff is more than a guide. It's a lifeline, steadying him as he trudges across ice. He whistles, the sound sharp, carrying across the white expanse. His body never rests. To stop walking, even for a short while, would invite the frost to creep in. Historical records from Alpine tax rolls mention that shepherding continued even in midwinter, though flocks were smaller and often brought into barns at night. To feed them, villagers hacked frozen haystacks with axes, breaking apart ice-crusted fodder. Imagine the effort of chopping hay as if it were firewood, sweat freezing on your brow while animals pressed close for scraps. Closer to the village, woodcutters labor in the forest. You hear the rhythmic thud of axes biting into pine. Chips fly, their pale scent sharp in the air. A fallen tree groans, then collapses with a crash muffled by snow. Men shout, breathless, hauling branches to sleds. Firewood is as valuable as bread, and gathering it is endless. It is work that keeps arms strong and blood coursing. Yet, as chroniclers often lamented, many froze in the act of saving others from freezing. There is irony in this. Death claimed them while they wrestled with the very resource meant to prolong life. Not far away, women bend over looms and spindles, their hands swift even in the dim light of smoky huts. The whir of thread twisting fills the room. Wool becomes yarn, yarn becomes cloth, and cloth becomes another layer against the cold. Without this constant labor, even the thickest cloak would fall apart within a season. A French traveller in the 15th century noted that mountain women work their hands to blood, spinning through the long winters. Yet, their rhythm is steady, their humming soft, their backs swaying as if weaving kept them warm in body as much as in spirit. Children, too, are not idle. You watch as two boys carry buckets of snow into the house, where it will melt near the hearth to become water for cooking. They stumble, spill, laugh, and run back outside. Even their play is labor, and even their labor is play. Movement keeps their cheeks red, their giggles sharp in the frosty air. There is a curious custom some villages practiced: snow stomping. Groups of children and teenagers trampled down paths after storms, compacting snow so sleds and carts could pass. Songs accompanied their stomping, transforming hard work into a rhythmic game. Songs like this rarely survive in writing, but oral tradition hints at verses urging the snow itself to lie flat and behave. Modern scholars remain divided on how much this constant work genuinely protected health. Some argue that activity prevented frostbite and hypothermia. Others suggest the strain weakened already underfed bodies, hastening sickness. Both views may hold truth. What you see, however, is simple. When villagers move, their faces glow. When they sit too long, their fingers stiffen and lips turn blue. Inside, work continues. Women knead dough, pounding it into rough loaves. The heat of their hands warms them as much as the bread. Men repair tools by the fire, their arms moving in steady strokes. Even elderly hands plait straw ropes, mending baskets or patching nets. To be idle is to freeze, so everyone contributes. One unusual detail catches your attention. In some regions, families assigned warming tasks specifically to the youngest children. A child might be told to stir a pot continuously, not because the stew required it, but because the motion kept the child's arms alive with heat. Another might be sent to fetch handfuls of kindling repeatedly, not out of need, but to ensure constant movement. Clever, if exhausting. As you wander through the village, the soundscape of labor surrounds you. The thwack of axes, the creak of sleds, the rasp of spinning wheels, the chatter of children. Each noise blends into a hum of survival, a work song without melody. It is strangely calming, a reminder that routine, even in hardship, builds endurance. Pause for a moment and consider the texture of these tasks. The bite of rope against your palms as you drag wood, the sting of snowflakes melting on your face while you bend to cut hay, the vibration of the loom against your legs as you pump the treadle. Each sensation is grounding, binding you to the present, making you forget the gnawing hunger or the howling wind outside. There's also ritual in this labor. At dusk, villagers return from the forest, their sleds heavy with logs. They parade through narrow lanes, leaving trails of wood chips. Neighbors watch and nod. The sight of stacked timber is reassurance that tonight the hearth will burn strong. Children clap, proud of their father's strength. Even in toil, there is pride, a visible proof of endurance carved from trees. Still, danger always hovers. Snowstorms trap shepherds, avalanches swallow woodcutters, illness strikes weavers hunched too long in smoky corners. Folk tales grew from these risks, cautionary stories of the frozen woodcutter who chopped too far, or the spinner whose wheel sang her to death. Behind each tale lies the reminder, work saves, but work can also kill. Night settles again. Inside the huts, labor doesn't cease. Wool continues to be spun, bread continues to be kneaded, tools continue to be mended. But in the pauses between, you hear laughter. A man jokes about his axe slipping. A woman teases her daughter for spinning crooked thread. The sound softens the edges of endless tasks, turning drudgery into something communal. As you stretch your arms, you feel the ache that comes from steady effort. Strangely, it feels good. The cold recedes when muscles burn. The villagers know this instinctively. Survival in the mountains is less about waiting and more about moving. Soon you will step into another hut and discover an even stranger source of warmth, one that bleats, moos, and occasionally smells terrible. But before we get there, remember today's lesson. In a world where stillness is dangerous, work itself is fire. The smell reaches you before the sight as an unmistakable blend of hay, dung, and animal musk drifting through the frosted air. You wrinkle your nose, but you don't turn away. In these mountain villages, animals were not just companions or food sources. They were heaters, allies in the nightly war against the cold. Step inside one of the larger huts now, and you immediately notice the family is not alone. To your left, a cow shifts heavily in its stall, its hide steaming faintly in the firelight. Chickens scuttle across the floor, pecking at scattered grains. A pair of goats bleat softly, their eyes catching the glow of the hearth. Even a donkey snorts in the corner, breath visible in the smoky air. You realize you've walked not into a home or a barn, but both at once. Contemporary tax registers and manorial records mention that many Alpine and Scandinavian peasants deliberately designed their houses to include animal stalls beneath the same roof. Sometimes the stalls were partitioned with wooden planks, other times merely separated by a low wall of stone. The logic was simple. Animal bodies radiated heat, and in winter, that warmth meant survival. Families lived, ate, and slept with their livestock just a few feet away. One traveller from Lombardy in the 14th century wrote in astonishment that he could hear cows breathing in bed at night when he visited Alpine peasants. He considered it barbaric. But the villagers, unimpressed, reminded him that those cows not only gave milk but also kept the air above freezing. Who, after all, was the foolish one? The man shivering in finery, or the family warmed by a living furnace? There's a curious and somewhat comical detail preserved in local folk stories. Children often used pigs as foot warmers. Imagine crawling into bed beside a squealing animal, wrapping your icy toes into its bristly flank. Parents tolerated it because, well, the pig tolerated it too, and warmth was warmth. Some tales even describe disputes between siblings over who got the warmest pig spot. Academics continue to debate how hygienic this arrangement was. Some argue the close quarters spread disease, pointing to occasional outbreaks of respiratory illness. Others counter that the smoke-filled air acted as a disinfectant, killing germs, while the animals themselves were healthier indoors than exposed to blizzards. Perhaps both views hold truth. What is clear is that despite the smell and noise, families chose this arrangement year after year. Listen closely. You hear the steady rhythm of the cow chewing cud, the scratch of chickens against the floor, the quiet snore of the family's eldest son rolled in blankets nearby. The room becomes a chorus of human and animal sound, woven together into a lullaby of survival. It is not a silence that comforts, but a noise that reassures. As long as the animals breathe, warmth and food remain within reach. You glance upward and see the ingenious design at play. In some homes, the animals were housed on the ground floor, while the family slept in lofts above. Heat rises, and so all night, the warmth of beasts drifted upward, seeping into straw mattresses. It was crude central heating, designed not by engineers, but by centuries of necessity. A strange memory survives in village lore. If an animal refused to enter the house on a winter night, it was considered an omen of misfortune. People whispered that the creature sensed a death coming, either in the family or in the herd. Whether superstition or coincidence, villagers rarely ignored such warnings. They coaxed stubborn animals inside with prayers and handfuls of grain, unwilling to leave anything to fate. Now picture the sensory details. The air is damp, heavy with ammonia and warmth. Your boots sink into straw that muffles sound but also hides messes you'd rather not step in. The heat radiating from so many bodies is surprisingly strong. You feel sweat prickle beneath your wool layers. Yet just beyond the thin walls, frost still creeps along the timbers. You realize how precarious the balance is. One wall between bitter death and a living stew of humanity and livestock. Children, oddly enough, seemed unbothered. Oral traditions recall that they grew up treating animals almost like siblings. Boys whispered secrets to calves. Girls plaited ribbons into goats' beards during festivals. The bond was more than practical. It was affectionate, forged by long nights spent side by side. Perhaps this explains why so many folk tales from mountain regions feature animals as wise companions rather than dumb beasts. There is pride, too, in this arrangement. To house animals indoors was to signal that you had animals to begin with. The poorest had none, relying only on human heat and weak fires. Families with cows and goats could drink milk, eat butter, and survive longer winters. Warmth and status were tied together by the bristly backs of livestock. Yet, risks abounded. A fire too close to straw bedding could ignite in seconds, threatening animals and humans alike. Avalanches sometimes buried barns and homes together, leaving rescuers frantically digging for both families and herds. In folklore, tragedies like these gave rise to ghostly tales, phantom cows lowing on stormy nights, spectral goats scratching at doors. These were warnings etched into memory. Protect the animals, and they will protect you. As you lean against the wooden partition, a goat nudges your hand, curious. Its fur is coarse, its breath warm. You smile despite yourself. Here in this smoky, noisy, crowded hut, comfort is strange, but real. Warmth arrives not from elegance, but from proximity, from creatures sharing their heat without complaint. Step back outside. The night is brutal, the stars sharp as daggers. You glance at the cluster of huts, each glowing faintly. Inside everyone, families and animals huddle together, a living fortress against the cold. Tomorrow you'll discover how prayer and ritual wrapped around these nights as tightly as wool or fur. But for now, let the image settle. Children drifting to sleep to the sound of cows breathing, goats stamping, chickens clucking, all life tangled together beneath one roof, defying the mountain's merciless frost. You step back into the village square, the snow crunching softly beneath your boots. Smoke curls from chimneys, rising lazily toward a sky freckled with stars. The hush is almost sacred. Tonight you follow the faint sound of murmured words and notice a door slightly ajar, candlelight flickering inside. Step in, and you find not just warmth but something deeper, faith and ritual, woven into the fabric of survival. The room is dim. A family kneels together near the hearth, their faces shadowed but intent. A mother murmurs a prayer, her hands folded, while a child clutches a small wooden cross. The father traces a symbol in the air, muttering words half Christian, half folk incantation. You realize that for these mountain people, belief is another layer of insulation, another defense against the cold. Ecclesiastical records from the 13th century describe how mountain parishes often struggled to reach their congregations in winter. Priests could not always cross snowbound passes, so villagers adapted. They blended church rituals with older traditions, praying to saints while also hanging charms against frost spirits. A saint's candle might burn beside an amulet of carved wood, each considered equally potent in keeping death at bay. One curious custom emerges from oral traditions. Villagers sprinkled holy water over their doorways on the coldest nights, not just for blessing but to freeze the devil out. In regions where wells were iced over, this water was melted snow, blessed quickly and thrown into the dark with whispered words. Imagine the hiss of cold water striking frozen wood, steam rising briefly before vanishing into the night. Scholars remain divided about the balance between official faith and folk practice. Some argue villagers clung tightly to church authority. Others insist the mountains nurtured a hybrid spirituality where saints and spirits coexisted. What you see here tonight confirms the latter, a crucifix above the hearth, yet herbs tied with red string dangling nearby. You listen to their words. The prayer is simple. Keep us warm. Keep us safe. Keep the embers alive. The rhythm is soothing, almost like a lullaby. Children's eyelids flutter, not just from fatigue, but from the reassurance that unseen powers stand watch. You sense that faith, whether in saints or charms, offers a kind of psychological heat. When the night feels endless and the snow threatens to swallow roofs, the belief that someone or something listens becomes a lifeline. Another ritual unfolds. A young girl tosses a handful of salt into the fire. The flames leap, sparks scattering. The family nods solemnly. Salt is precious, but on nights like this, its sacrifice is worth it. Folklore says sparks from salted flames chase away frost demons lurking at thresholds. Whether you believe or not, the sight is mesmerizing, the crackle sharp against the hush of night. Curious artifacts line the shelf. A wooden figure shaped like a horned goat, said to ward off storms, a tattered parchment with a saint's prayer, a pouch filled with herbs, tied tightly shut. Each object is small, but together they form an invisible shield. Families guard these treasures as fiercely as they guard firewood. Outside, bells ring faintly from the chapel at the village centre. Even buried in snow, its small tower still calls. Villagers gather when weather allows, trudging through drifts with candles held high. The chapel's interior is stark, its floor damp with melting snow, but voices fill it with warmth. Hymns echo, rising into rafters blackened with smoke. The sound is both worship and defiance, a reminder that even the coldest mountain cannot silence their song. A particularly curious tale survives from Tyrolean valleys. During Epiphany, villagers dressed as the three kings, chalking their initials above doorways C, M, and B. But tucked beneath those letters, in faint scratches, were older symbols meant to keep away witches and frost spirits. Layers of belief stacked like layers of clothing, each guarding against an unseen chill. Watch the children's faces now as they gaze at flickering candles. They don't fully understand the theology, but they feel its power. To them, the glow means safety, and perhaps that's enough. Faith is not always about doctrine, it's about reassurance, and reassurance is warmth. The elderly man you saw earlier raises his hand. His voice cracks as he begins a chant, half prayer, half charm. As the fire burns, so shall our bodies stay. As the snow falls, so shall our souls endure. The family repeats after him. It's rhythmic, hypnotic, like a mantra against despair. For a moment, you forget the cold. Step outside again. The wind bites, but your mind lingers on the glow within. Faith here is not abstract. It is a blanket of words, a shield of ritual, a fire of belief. Without it, villagers might still survive physically, but perhaps not in spirit. As you walk back through the clustered lanes, you notice charms nailed above every door, bundles of straw, carved wooden discs, sprigs of evergreen. Each one whispers the same message: we will endure. Tomorrow, you'll discover how snow itself, enemy and protector, shaped these lives. But tonight, remember the sight. Families praying beside hearths, charms swaying in smoke, voices rising against the endless winter dark. The prayers of the previous night still echo in your ears as you step into daylight. A hush hangs over the village. Snowdrifts pile high, curling against walls, blocking doors, and narrowing alleys into tunnels. At first glance, it seems suffocating, an endless obstacle, a weight pressing down from sky to earth. But as you walk deeper into the white labyrinth, you notice something strange. This snow is not just a threat, it is also a shield. You brush your hand against a wall of snow where villagers have packed it tightly along the side of a hut. The air feels warmer inside compared to outside. It dawns on you. Snow, for all its cruelty, insulates. A thick drift pressed against walls traps heat like a blanket, muffling the worst of the icy wind. Chronicles from Swiss valleys mention peasants deliberately piling snow against their homes, a practice outsiders thought absurd. Yet, it worked. Nature's enemy became an ally. Look closely, and you'll see how the lanes have transformed. Roofs sag under white weight, but the narrow paths between houses resemble caves. Overhanging snow bridges buildings together, turning open air into corridors. The wind that roared through yesterday is hushed now, subdued by its own snowfall. Children chase each other in these tunnels, their laughter echoing like birdsong in hollow spaces. What looks like entrapment becomes a fortress. Travelers' journals from the 15th century describe how entire villages seemed to vanish under snow. Roofs barely poked above the surface, and smoke curled from tiny holes dug upward for air. Outsiders imagined tragedy, but inside, life continued, warmth preserved under layers of ice. Some scholars still debate whether these accounts were exaggerated or whether entire hamlets truly became subterranean in winter. Perhaps the truth is in between, but the vision is striking. Humans burrowing like animals, carving survival under snow's heavy blanket. There's a curious custom recorded in Tyrolean lore. Villagers carved windows into snowbanks beside doors, sticking candles inside. At night, the snow glowed faintly, like lanterns made of ice. Travelers said the effect was hauntingly beautiful, a ghostly village flickering under moonlight. Yet it was practical too. The glow marked paths between houses, preventing people from losing their way in storms. But snow's embrace was double-edged. The weight of drifts crushed roofs, collapsed barns, smothered animals. Avalanches thundered down slopes, erasing entire households in moments. A chilling story survives in folklore. The White Hunger, a storm that buried families so completely that only the tops of chimney poles showed. Weeks later, when rescuers dug through, they found survivors still alive, preserved in snow caves, rationing crumbs of bread. The line between grave and refuge was perilously thin. Step now into one of the huts where snow has piled thick around the walls. The interior feels muffled, almost cozy. The silence is deep, broken only by crackles from the hearth. You press your palm to the wall. Instead of bitter chill, The snowbank holds back wind, softening the room's air. The family inside doesn't curse the drift, they thank it. They sleep better when snow seals their home, when the world outside is buried in silence. Listen to the stories they share. A man recalls how his grandfather once built an emergency shelter in a storm, hollowing out a drift with bare hands. Inside that icy cave, he survived 3 days, kept alive by his own breath warming the frozen walls. It sounds impossible. Yet modern science confirms that snow caves, properly built, can keep temperatures just above freezing even when blizzards rage outside. Children turn snow into playthings, not just burdens. They carve slides down drifts, tumble laughing, and dig tunnels between houses. You see them crawling on all fours, pretending to be foxes or marmots. Their joy softens the harshness, their games echoing an instinct as old as humanity, to make even danger into a playground. Yet villagers remain wary. Elders tell them never to shout too loudly near slopes, for noise was believed to trigger avalanches. Some scholars dismiss this as superstition. Others note that vibrations can indeed disturb fragile layers of snow. The belief, true or not, shaped behavior. Children learn to tread softly, voices hushed near mountain walls, as if the very snow listened for excuses to fall. At times, snow became currency. Villagers collected the cleanest drifts and packed them into storage pits to cool milk and butter in warmer months. Frozen water became wealth, another resource to stretch survival. One curious tale even tells of snow carried down to valleys to chill wine for noble banquets, a strange inversion, peasants selling their hardship to add elegance to feasts. Step outside again and watch how villagers move. They carry poles, prodding ahead as they walk, testing whether ground or hollow snow lies before them. Footprints vanish in minutes, so paths are marked with sticks or evergreen branches. To stray even a few steps could mean sinking chest deep into a hidden drift. The discipline of walking one behind the other becomes ritual. Each step is a quiet vow. Follow the path, stay with the group, live to see the thaw. As evening falls, the snowbanks glow faintly blue, reflecting the last of the light. Fires inside the huts make walls shimmer, shadows dancing across frosted surfaces. You realize snow is more than weather here, it is architecture, prison, and shield. Its presence dictates how families eat, sleep, move, and pray. You lean against a drift, listening to the hush. The cold seeps slowly, but you notice how your body warms the snow in return, leaving a faint hollow where you stood. The exchange is mutual. Life presses back against the mountain, reshaping even the coldest substance into ally. Tomorrow, you'll join the villagers as they light great fires and feast in defiance of frost, festivals of survival hidden within endless winter. But for now, remember this paradox. In the harshest months, snow was both enemy and protector, a blanket of silence that smothered and saved in equal measure. The night has grown deep, and the village feels wrapped in silence. Then, unexpectedly, sound erupts, a crackle of laughter, the thump of boots on hard snow, the sudden flare of firelight spilling into the dark. You follow the glow to an open space where villagers gather despite the cold. Tonight is not about chores or quiet endurance. Tonight is about defiance. Festivals are their rebellion, their chance to push back against the mountain's cruelty with fire, food, and noise. At the center stands a towering bonfire. Sparks leap skyward like a spray of stars, and the flames roar as though mocking the winter sky. Families crowd around, their cloaks drawn tight, but their faces glowing in the heat. The air smells of smoke and roasted meat, richer than anything you've encountered in weeks. Festivals are rare during the frozen months, but when they come, they are fierce, almost desperate celebrations of life against death. Medieval records mention Candlemas, held in February, when villagers lit torches and carried them through lanes to drive away the dark season. Priests framed it as devotion to the Virgin Mary, yet in mountain villages, echoes of older fire rituals lingered. Flames weren't just symbols of faith, they were weapons against frost spirits and lingering night. Even in Christianized Europe, these practices clung to survival like ivy to stone. You watch as children dance in circles, their cheeks red, their voices rising in song. The words are half prayer, half rhyme, calling for spring's return. Some scholars insist these rituals were meant to appease weather gods long before Christianity. Others argue they were simply excuses for joy in lean months. Whatever their origins, you can see clearly their effect. Villagers who yesterday trudged silently now leap and sing, faces alight with warmth both literal and emotional. An odd custom unfolds near the fire. Men wear masks carved from wood, painted with fierce expressions, beasts with horns, demons with tusks, wild men with tangled hair. They stomp and bellow, chasing children playfully, scattering snow with heavy boots. It looks like chaos, yet it is ritualized chaos. These masked figures embody winter's terrors, only to be mocked, laughed at, and symbolically burned away. In the flickering light, you almost believe the mountain itself quails under their defiance. Travelers from the 15th century describe such processions vividly. In the Tyrol, peasants donned furs and horns, frightening animals and children alike, claiming their racket scared away evil. Some authorities tried to ban these pagan survivals, but the customs endured. Scholars remain divided about their true meaning. Were they remnants of pre-Christian rites, or simply carnivalesque outlets for pent-up fear? You realize the debate hardly matters. For the villagers, the point is clear: they reclaim power, if only for a night. Food, scarce as it is, appears in abundance compared to daily fare. A pig slaughtered for the occasion roasts slowly, dripping fat onto coals. Bread loaves, baked larger than usual, are shared generously, each family offering a piece. Wheels of cheese, hoarded since autumn, are cut open with ceremony, their sharp aroma mingling with the smoke. For once, no one measures crumbs nervously. Tonight, bellies fill until they ache, and laughter replaces the growl of hunger. You notice another curious practice. Fermented drinks flow more freely tonight. Ale, cider, even a precious jug of mead is passed hand to hand. The air grows warmer with song, bodies swaying, stories tumbling out. Elders tell of winters harsher than this, when wolves prowled the edges of firelight and avalanches devoured barns. Children lean close, half frightened, half excited. Storytelling is as essential as food tonight, stitching generations together with words. The sensory details envelop you: the roar of the fire, the clang of bells tied to dancers' waists, the smell of meat and cheese, the tang of smoke in your lungs. You feel sweat bead under your layers despite the cold air. The festival is not just ritual, it is release, a pressure valve for fear and hardship. In the firelight, faces glow with something rare: hope. One villager explains softly that these gatherings are promises. By feasting, they vow that scarcity will not break them. By dancing, they declare that their limbs are still strong. By shouting into the night, they remind the mountains that humans remain stubborn, noisy, alive. A peculiar detail emerges as midnight nears. A bundle of straw, dressed like a man, is dragged to the flames. The figure represents winter itself, straw limbs stiff, face crudely painted. Villagers jeer, then hurl it into the fire. The straw ignites instantly, collapsing into sparks. Cheers erupt. For a moment, it feels as though the season's grip loosens, even if spring remains far away. Step back from the fire, watch the faces: children glowing with awe, elders smiling softly, young couples clasping hands. These festivals are not frequent, they cost too much in resources. But when they happen, they bind the village tighter than any wall. Shared hunger becomes shared joy, and shared fear transforms into courage. As the fire burns lower, villagers gather embers to carry back home. Each family leaves with a glowing coal, relighting their hearths with festival flame. It is both practical and symbolic. The community fire shared equally, ensuring that no hut sleeps in darkness tonight. You trail behind the last family, your breath visible in the cooling air. Snow crunches, but your mind still hums with drums, laughter, and song. Tomorrow, you'll follow villagers beyond the clustered lanes, where trading routes cut through icy passes and survival demands courage on open paths. But tonight, hold the vision close. A bonfire roaring against a black sky, masks leering, children singing, and a straw man burning away the cold, if only in their hearts. The bonfire's glow still lingers in your mind when dawn pulls you toward the edge of the settlement. There, the clustered huts give way to open whiteness, a world of silence broken only by the crunch of boots and the scrape of sled runners on frozen paths. It is along these precarious routes that villagers gamble their safety for survival. Trade, in the coldest months, is perilous, yet without it, mountain life collapses. You watch a caravan form slowly. Men harness shaggy ponies to sleds piled high with wool, cheese, and cured meats. Women wrap bundles of cloth, dried herbs, and hand-carved tools. Each family contributes, knowing that what leaves today must return as salt, iron, or oil goods the mountains cannot provide. Even in the heart of winter, necessity forces movement. Records from Alpine toll stations describe these journeys with chilling brevity. So many pounds of salt delivered, so many bolts of wool taxed, so many lives lost to storms. Reading those lines centuries later, you sense the unspoken. Every sack of salt was worth a man's fingers frostbitten, every wool bale perhaps purchased by a widow's tears. Step onto the path yourself. The snow here is uneven, packed by countless journeys but broken by drifts that creep in overnight. The caravan moves in single file, poles in hand, prodding the surface to test for hidden ice. Each creak of sled runners feels like a heartbeat against the silence. Overhead, cliffs loom, white teeth waiting to release avalanches at the smallest provocation. A curious practice comes into view. Traders carry bells tied to their animals, soft chimes ringing as they move. The sound warns others on the path, but also, villagers insist, keeps away spirits said to haunt lonely passes. One legend speaks of frost demons who delighted in silence, so bells became both signal and shield. Whether true or not, the jingling offers comfort, a fragile melody threading through the frozen air. You notice one sled stacked with barrels of salt. Salt is life here, not only seasoning but preservation. Without it, meat and fish rot, milk spoils. Villagers treat it like treasure, and indeed, toll records often list salt as valuable as gold. To secure a few barrels requires journeys that risk frostbite, wolves, and landslides. Still, they go, because hunger waits for no one. The wind sharpens as the caravan rounds a ridge. A man at the front lifts his hand, signaling caution. The path narrows, dropping sharply to one side. You inch forward carefully, hearing the scrape of sled runners and the low grunts of ponies straining. Below, the valley yawns, silent and white. A single misstep would mean a tumble into oblivion. Chroniclers recount entire caravans lost this way, men, animals, goods swallowed in a moment. Some say survivors marked the spots with wooden crosses. Others claim they avoided the sites entirely, whispering that the snow itself remembered. Scholars still debate how often such tragedies occurred, though bones and rusted metal found in crevasses suggest the danger was real. At night, traders huddle in caves or crude shelters dug into drifts. They light small fires, shielded carefully so sparks do not reveal them to wolves. Stories tell of these encampments alive with song and prayer, men reminding each other why they risked so much, children at home waiting, villages depending, life itself tethered to their return. You sit with them for a moment, sharing a crust of barley bread, dipped in melted snow. The taste is bland, but the camaraderie is rich. A man pulls out a pouch of dried berries, rare and precious, passing them around as if to sweeten the night itself. Another hums a tune, soft and steady, a reminder that sound pushes back against silence as surely as fire pushes back against cold. By morning, the caravan moves again, breath steaming, boots crunching. You feel the ache in your legs, the numbness in your fingers, the weight of fear pressing down with every step. Yet, there is also exhilaration. Each mile conquered is a small victory against the mountain. Each safe delivery of salt or iron means children fed, fires burning, lives prolonged. One unusual account from a 14th century merchant describes villagers strapping barrels of goods onto sleds and then sliding them down icy slopes, chasing after them with whoops and laughter. Dangerous, yes, but faster than trudging the long way around. The merchant wrote in disbelief. But you can almost picture the scene: sleds thundering down, men running after, a mad dance between disaster and efficiency. Back in the village, the return of traders is an event. Children run to meet them, eyes wide at sacks of salt and bundles of cloth. Women cheer softly, relief flooding their faces. The goods are divided, debts settled, and prayers whispered for those who did not return. Every journey leaves scars, but also binds the community tighter. Step away from the crowd. Look at the mountain passes glowing under pale light, still treacherous, still waiting. They are lifelines, yes, but also graveyards. The villagers know this, yet they walk them anyway. Trade is not just commerce here, it is a gamble with death, played because not playing means certain hunger. As night falls again, you hear bells from distant ridges fading into the dark. Tomorrow, you'll peer into baskets and cupboards, learning what medicines people brewed to fight frostbite and coughs. But tonight, let the sound of bells linger in your memory, a fragile tune against the vast, white silence, proof that even in the harshest passes, life keeps moving. The traders have returned, their sleds emptied of salt and iron, their faces wind-burnt and weary. Yet even with full cupboards, the mountain winter does not relent. Cold bites into skin, damp settles into lungs, and small ailments can quickly spiral into threats. Step inside a hut with me now, and you'll see another hidden front in the war for survival. Medicine, improvised, herbal, and sometimes downright strange. A young boy sits near the hearth, his hands red and swollen. He winces as his mother rubs a paste onto his fingers. The smell is sharp garlic crushed into animal fat, smeared thick over raw skin. This crude salve, according to village law, draws out frost's poison and restores warmth. Some travelers scoffed at such practices. Others noted that the cloves did seem to fight infection. Perhaps accident, perhaps insight. But either way, the boy sighs with relief. You glance into a basket beside the hearth. It brims with dried plants: sage, thyme, nettles, elderflowers. Monastic manuscripts list these herbs carefully, their properties debated even among scholars. Sage boiled in water was thought to soothe throats. Thyme steeped in ale eased coughs. Nettle tea, bitter though it tasted, gave strength when bodies felt weak. For mountain folk, these were not luxuries. They were lifelines plucked from forests and fields. A curious practice stands out. Villagers sometimes warmed flat stones, then pressed them against chests to ease coughing fits. The heat, they believed, loosened the frost inside the lungs. Some scholars today argue it was ineffective. Others note the comfort of warmth might have soothed pain. Either way, when choices were few, even the illusion of relief was worth pursuing. Records from alpine abbeys mention poultices of honey spread on wounds, the sticky sweetness sealing cuts from wood axes or sled accidents. Honey's antiseptic properties are confirmed now, but back then it was simply seen as a gift from God, sweet and healing at once. Children licked the edges when mothers weren't looking, their tongues catching the rare taste of sugar in a season of scarcity. You hear a cough from the corner. An elder bends forward, hacking, his shoulders trembling. His daughter pours him a steaming mug of elderberry syrup mixed with hot water. The scent is tart, earthy. Villagers believe it drives away winter fevers. Folklore claims the elder tree itself stood guard against evil. Its berries, therefore, carried protection within them. One odd custom makes you raise your eyebrows. Some families tied garlic bulbs or dried herbs around children's necks, believing the smell repelled sickness. The children smelled like walking spice racks, but villagers swore fewer fevers struck them. Was it placebo, or the faint antimicrobial powers of the plants? Scholars remain divided. Still, in huts where smoke and dampness ruled, any edge was precious. There were stranger remedies still. Travellers wrote of peasants rubbing goose fat on chapped skin, then wrapping cloth tightly around limbs. Others described onion poultices strapped to feet at night to draw illness downward. You picture the sharp sting of onion against skin, the sticky warmth of fat, the sigh of a parent praying it might work. Not all cures were gentle. Some remedies leaned toward ritual. A child with recurring cough might be led at dawn to breathe through a hole cut in the ice of a stream. The shock of cold air, villagers believed, frightened sickness away. To modern ears it sounds harsh, even dangerous. But when choices were few, hope was often disguised as treatment. The boundaries between healing and faith blurred constantly. Charms carved with crosses were pressed into hands of the ill. Prayers to saints, especially street. Blaze, protector of throats, were whispered over steaming cups. At the same time, whispers of older beliefs lingered. Some families burned sprigs of juniper, letting the smoke swirl through huts to chase away cough demons. Practical fumigation or mystical ritual? Perhaps both. The sensory landscape of medicine is vivid. The sting of garlic in your nose, the sweetness of honey on your tongue, the bitterness of nettle tea scraping down your throat. Smoke from herbs curls into your eyes, making them water. You feel the rough heat of a stone pressed to your chest, the scratch of wool wrapping around ointments. Healing here is not sterile. It is messy, pungent, tactile. Even amid strangeness, there was learning. Families knew frostbite fingers must be thawed slowly, rubbed gently with snow, not plunged into fire. They knew hot drinks steadied the weak better than cold water. They knew that movement, laughter, and song were medicines of their own, keeping despair at bay when no herb could. Oral traditions carried these lessons, each generation adding small insights carved from hard winters. Yet, death still claimed many. Stories linger of children lost to fevers, of elders who coughed their last breath on frozen nights. Villagers explained these losses in many ways. God's will, spirit's mischief, the mountain's hunger. Still, they fought back with every root, every leaf, every whispered prayer. Survival was stitched not just from wool and wood, but from the stubborn hope that nature's own cupboard might provide enough. One man shows you a pouch tied to his belt. Inside are dried herbs mixed with salt, his travel medicine. He explains that when crossing passes, he chews them to keep lungs clear. You try one leaf, and its bitterness makes you grimace, but soon your chest feels oddly warmed. Perhaps there is truth hidden in bitterness. As night falls, the hut fills with the scents of remedies. Garlic roasting in fat, thyme simmering in broth, honey stirred into water. You realize medicine here is not separate from daily life. It is woven into meals, into fires, into lullabies. Healing is not an event but a rhythm, a constant adjustment to cold's endless assault. Tomorrow, you'll step into the quieter world of women's winter labors, the unseen work that kept homes alive. But tonight, remember this. In mountain huts where every cough was dangerous, medicine was everywhere boiling in pots, hanging from rafters, whispered in charms and smeared onto skin. Healing, like survival, was a communal act, pungent and persistent. The scents of garlic, honey and smoke still cling to you as you leave the hut of remedies behind. Snow drifts glow pale under a thin slice of moon, and you hear the steady hum of spinning wheels from another doorway. When you step inside, the atmosphere shifts, quieter, steadier, filled with the constant rhythm of hands at work. Here you find the hidden backbone of survival, the winter labors of women, often overlooked, yet vital to keeping entire households alive. The first sight is simple but hypnotic. A woman sits by the fire, spinning wool. Her hands move without pause, drawing fibers into long threads that coil onto a spindle. The whir of wood turning is soft but insistent, a heartbeat of the household. Wool is life in these mountains, and winter is when raw fleece becomes garments, blankets, and bandages. Chronicles from 14th century alpine villages note that women spun for hours each day, often by firelight so dim they strained their eyes. Their work meant the difference between freezing or surviving. You glance around the room. Cloth is everywhere. Strips of linen hang near the smoke to dry after washing. Cloaks lie folded in rough piles, and patched garments cover nearly every surface. A girl no older than 12 pushes a needle through fur, mending her brother's boots. Her fingers are raw, yet her stitches are careful. This labor is as natural to her as play, and perhaps in truth, it is both. Curious habits surface in these rooms. Some women rubbed beeswax into threads before sewing, making them stronger and more resistant to damp. Others stitched tiny charms, a cross, a sprig of herb into the lining of children's clothes, unseen protections carried close to the skin. Travelers who noticed these odd details often dismissed them as superstition. Yet for the women, sewing was more than craft. It was prayer, woven in secret into every seam. Step into another corner, and you find baking underway. The smell of bread fills the smoky air, thick and yeasty. Women knead coarse dough of barley or rye, pounding it with fists until it yields. Their movements are strong, almost fierce, the rhythm warming their arms. Bread here is not light or fluffy. It is dense, dark, and heavy enough to serve as both food and weapon. Records from medieval accounts describe mountain loaves so hard they had to be broken with knives or hammers. Yet once softened in broth, they sustained families through months of hunger. Scholars argue whether these women's daily tasks, spinning, mending, baking, were undervalued in official records or silently recognized as essential. Tax rolls rarely mention them, but oral traditions sing of house mothers whose hands spun warmth from cold. The debate lingers, but as you watch, there is no doubt. Without these labors, no family could have endured. Another woman tends a cauldron, stirring slowly. At first you think it is soup, but then she lifts out strips of wool, now darkened with dye from crushed berries and bark. Winter is also a time for dyeing cloth, when outdoor work slows and households prepare garments for spring. The smell of boiling bark mingles with smoke, pungent and earthy. She hums softly as she stirs, the tune blending with the bubbling water. In a corner, a group of women weave baskets from willow twigs gathered before the snow. Their fingers move quickly, weaving tight patterns, shaping tools for carrying grain or firewood. One laughs, telling a story, and soon the room fills with chuckles. You realize these tasks, repetitive as they are, also bring companionship. Laughter itself becomes part of survival, woven into baskets as surely as willow strands. One unusual custom stands out. Women sometimes plucked goose feathers and stuffed them into pillows during winter. These weren't luxuries for comfort, but essential barriers against frost creeping into bones during sleep. Feathers trapped heat, turning straw beds into softer, warmer nests. Children squealed with delight at the feathery chaos, feathers sticking to their hair and eyelashes, laughter echoing against smoky beams. The sensory world here is intimate. The rasp of needles through fur, the thud of fists against dough, the soft hiss of dye pots bubbling, the smell of yeast and smoke clinging to hair. You feel the rough texture of wool against your palm, the prickle of straw escaping from pillows, the sting of smoke in your throat as women lean closer to fires. Every sense is engaged, reminding you that this is survival not by grand feats but by endless small motions. As dusk falls, stories ripple through the room. One woman tells of her grandmother who spun thread so fine it was gifted to a monastery. Another recalls winters when no grain could be baked, only bark ground into flour. The stories are harsh, but they are told with humor, as if to say, "We endured, and so will you." Oral memory is as important as cloth or bread. It passes resilience along with recipes and patterns. Children listen, their hands busy with small chores, plucking wool, carrying water, fetching kindling. Girls especially watch closely, for these tasks will soon be theirs. Boys, too, learn in part, though they drift toward other duties outside. Yet in this room, for a few hours each evening, labor is communal, binding generations together. One detail catches your imagination. Women sometimes marked loaves with crosses before baking, believing it warded off hunger. Was it prayer, habit, or both? When you see the baked bread, the mark remains faintly visible, a sign carved into sustenance itself. The gesture is simple, but it transforms bread into more than food. It becomes protection, reassurance baked into every bite. Step back for a moment. Look at the room, the steady whir of spinning, the murmur of stories, the smell of bread rising, the glow of dye pots, the laughter of children. It is not heroic in the way of traders crossing snowy passes or woodcutters felling frozen trees, yet it is no less vital. Without these winter labors, bodies would be unclothed, bellies unfed, spirits unmoored. Night deepens. The women set aside their tools, cover the dough to rise near the hearth, fold the cloth, stack the baskets. Their hands, raw and cracked, rest briefly before tomorrow resumes the same rhythm. They tuck children beneath furs, hum lullabies, and finally allow themselves to lean back, eyes heavy. As you step out into the crisp air, you carry with you the memory of their quiet endurance. Tomorrow, you'll hear the songs and stories that warmed minds as much as hearths warmed bodies. But tonight, remember the steady labor of women in smoky huts, the spinning, the sewing, the baking, the laughter. It is in these endless, unseen gestures that the true survival of mountain villages was woven, thread by thread. The air outside is sharp and thin, but inside the huts, a softer warmth lingers not just from the hearth, but from words. Tonight, as you step into another crowded room, you notice that no loom clacks, no dough is needed. Instead, voices fill the space. Songs and tales ripple through the smoky air, carrying comfort through the long night. If food feeds the body, and fire shields the skin, stories nourish the spirit. A young boy begins with a simple tune, his voice clear and high, echoing like a bird across the rafters. The melody is repetitive, lulling, each verse looping back on itself. The lyrics are about the sun, how it hides behind mountains but always returns. To adults, it is a children's lullaby. To children, it is reassurance that even the longest night will eventually give way to light. Monastic manuscripts from the 13th century mention such songs, calling them rustic rhymes, often dismissed as trivial. Yet for families huddled in winter huts, they were lifelines of rhythm, soothing nerves frayed by darkness. Beside the fire, an elder clears his throat. Silence falls as he begins a tale, voice gravelly but steady. He tells of a hunter who wandered too far, who met a wolf with eyes like embers. But instead of killing him, the wolf spoke, warning him to return before the snow swallowed him whole. The hunter obeyed and lived. The lesson is clear. Heed the dangers of the mountain. Respect the creatures within it. Folklore in these regions is not abstract. It is survival advice clothed in wonder. Curious details pepper these stories. One woman recalls how her grandmother claimed to have heard voices in the snow, whispers that called her name. Scholars argue whether such tales are exaggerations, hallucinations from hunger, or metaphors passed down. Whatever their origin, the effect is powerful. Children huddle closer, eyes wide, absorbing fear as a lesson. Never wander alone into the white silence. Sometimes, songs drift toward humor. Men improvise verses about stubborn goats or clumsy neighbors, laughter bubbling between lines. Even in hardship, humor surfaces, a release valve for tension. You can almost hear the relief in the room. Laughter is warmth too, a fire that crackles in the chest. There's a curious practice you notice. Some villagers tap rhythms on benches or the floor as stories unfold, keeping time like a drumbeat. Folklorists who studied alpine traditions centuries later noted that this habit may have roots in pagan rituals where rhythm summoned courage against winter. Whether sacred or silly, the steady tapping anchors the room, binding listeners together. The sensory texture is vivid. You hear the crack of logs, the rustle of straw, the rising and falling cadence of voices. You smell smoke curling into herbs hung overhead, mingling with the musty odor of wool. You feel the closeness of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, the brush of a child's sleeve as they lean against you, transfixed. Some stories carry darker weight. An elder recounts the White Lady, a spectral figure said to wander blizzards, luring travelers into drifts. Children gasp. Adults nod solemnly. To us it sounds like myth. To them it is memory shaped into warning. Was the White Lady frostbite, hypothermia, or simply fear given a face? Scholars continue to debate, but for villagers, her legend keeps children cautious when storms howl. Not all tales are frightening. Love songs rise, gentle and slow, sung by young couples seated together. Their lyrics speak of spring meadows and flowers yet unseen, promises of warmth to come. In the middle of endless snow, to imagine blooming fields is itself an act of hope. Some songs, written down centuries later, are startlingly tender. Verses of longing, promises whispered against cold winds, reminders that even in the harshest climate, hearts still warmed. A curious tidbit preserved in chronicles describes traveling minstrels who sometimes reached these villages despite snow. They carried instruments, fiddles, flutes, even drums, and were welcomed like heroes. For a night, the huts would swell with music far richer than usual, neighbors crowding in until the air grew stifling. Payment was often food or shelter rather than coin, but the true reward was joy. Imagine hearing a fiddle echo across frozen valleys, each note proof that the world outside had not forgotten you. Children often joined in storytelling themselves. One boy recites a tale of a bear who stole honey from monks, earning chuckles from adults. A girl sings a rhyme about snowflakes as angels, drifting down to watch over sleepers. Their creativity, though simple, is cherished. It shows resilience blooming even in the smallest voices. Scholars remain divided about the exact accuracy of oral traditions, but they agree on one thing: these tales carried values, respect for nature, warnings against greed, the importance of community. Wrapped in rhyme and rhythm, they slipped easily into memory, passed down like heirlooms. You sense how much they mattered not as entertainment alone, but as anchors of identity. As night deepens, voices soften into lullabies. Mothers hum as they rock children swaddled in wool. The melodies are gentle, repetitive, hypnotic. Words fade into murmurs, rhythms into vibrations felt more than heard. You feel your own eyelids grow heavy, soothed by tones designed for sleep. These are not just songs, they are spells, weaving rest from worry. One unusual custom you notice is the practice of story stones. Children hold small pebbles, and each time a storyteller pauses, the child places a stone into a bowl, marking the turn of the tale. The bowl fills as the night stretches, a tactile reminder of stories shared. Later, those stones might be scattered in the snow, symbolic offerings to carry the words into the world. You lean back, listening as the elder's voice trails off, replaced by the crackle of fire and the hum of a final lullaby. In this moment, the mountain seems less threatening, the cold less cruel. Stories and songs weave a cocoon stronger than furs, warmer than stones. They remind you that survival is not only about heat and food, but about meaning something to hold on to when snow buries doors and winds rattle walls. Tomorrow, you'll follow villagers onto frozen rivers, where ice itself becomes a highway linking valleys. But tonight, let the sound of lullabies linger in your ears. Let the warmth of words, the rhythm of stories, and the laughter of children be your blanket against the mountain's endless winter. The night of songs and stories has ended, leaving behind echoes in the smoke-stained rafters. When morning comes, the air outside is brittle with cold. Yet villagers step out with purpose, because today the frozen rivers are not obstacles, they are highways. In the mountains where steep cliffs and endless snow-choked land routes, ice itself becomes the road that ties valleys together. You follow a group toward the edge of the village. There, the river stretches like a silver ribbon, its surface locked tight by weeks of frost. Steam rises faintly from cracks where water still flows below. Men test the ice with poles, striking sharply. The sound rings solid, echoing like a drum. Nods pass between them, safe enough for now. Written records from Nordic and Alpine regions note that frozen rivers doubled as thoroughfares, especially for heavy loads. Sleds glided more easily over ice than through snow-choked paths. What once hindered became advantage. Wool, firewood, barrels of ale, all could move faster across glittering surfaces than over crooked mountain tracks. You hear a sharp creak under your boots as you step onto the ice. For a moment, fear tugs at you. Beneath lies dark water, colder than death. But villagers stride confidently, accustomed to this fragile road. Horses pull sleds across, hooves ringing hollow. Children laugh as they run and slide, their voices bright against the vast silence. One curious practice comes to light. Some families carved grooves into sled runners, then rubbed them with animal fat or wax. This made the sleds glide so smoothly that travelers claimed they flew faster than birds. Others tied leather straps to their boots, crude skates that let them push across ice with long, sweeping strides. Travelers from the Low Countries remarked in awe at mountain children, skating as though born to it, their balance perfected by necessity rather than sport. Yet danger was constant. A misstep near thin ice could be fatal. Folklore is filled with warnings, tales of ice spirits who cracked the surface beneath careless feet, dragging souls into black water. Whether myth or metaphor, the lesson was clear: walk carefully, listen for creaks, respect the frozen path. Scholars still debate how many accidents were real versus legendary, but bones found in riverbeds suggest the risk was very real. You pause and listen. The river groans, a deep, eerie sound, like the mountain's own voice rumbling beneath. Villagers ignore it. To them, it is simply part of winter's song, yet you feel the hair rise on your neck. The ice seems alive, stretching, shifting, holding. The sensory details are sharp. The surface beneath your feet is slick, forcing careful steps. The wind cuts across open space, harsher than in the village lanes. Hooves strike with hollow rhythm. Sleds hiss softly. Children shriek with joy. Each sound is amplified by the vast openness, echoing down the valley. Trade flourishes here too. Families from other hamlets appear, their sleds stacked high. They exchange goods quickly, knowing daylight is short. Salt passes for wool, cheese for grain. Greetings are brief but warm smiles, embraces, words shouted over the wind. These icy markets remind you that no village truly stands alone. Even in winter, connection endures. A curious tradition surfaces. Villagers sometimes carved small altars in the snow along river routes, placing candles inside. The flickering lights guided travelers at night, and they believed appeased river spirits. One chronicle describes seeing dozens of glowing alcoves, turning the ice into a corridor of stars. Practical lanterns or spiritual offerings? Likely both. Children, of course, transform the highway into play. They chase each other on sleds, laughing as they spin across the ice. One boy ties a rope around a dog, letting it drag him until he tumbles with a whoop. Adults scold lightly, but smile play is warmth too, as essential as bread. As the day wanes, villagers hurry back. They know ice is fickle, safer in morning cold, more treacherous under afternoon Sunday stories tell of sleds plunging through as cracks widened. Survivors recalled the shock of icy water, the scramble to climb out before clothes froze stiff. Some were saved, others vanished beneath. Every family remembers someone lost this way, and the river's frozen face carries both promise and grief. Back at the village, sleds are unloaded, goods stacked in storerooms. Children boast about their races. Men joke about close calls. Women tally what was gained. Relief is palpable. The frozen road gave them speed, but it demanded respect. They survived another day's gamble with the mountain. Step away from the bustle. Look back at the river under fading light. Its surface gleams, silver fading into shadow. Tomorrow, it will groan again under sleds, again carry laughter, again claim perhaps a careless step. Yet without it, villages would starve, cut off completely. Frozen water becomes bridge and battlefield, both trusted and feared. Tomorrow, you'll step into huts again, to see how crude experiments in insulation, moss, clay, dung transformed fragile walls into stronger barriers. But tonight, let the memory linger. The eerie song of ice, the hiss of sleds, the shimmer of candles in snow alcoves, and the laughter of children skating across death itself. The river's icy groans still echo in your mind as you step back into the village lanes. Snow crunches underfoot, but tonight you are drawn toward the huts themselves. Their crooked walls lean against one another, like weary neighbors, patched and layered with every material villagers can muster. If the hearth is the heart of survival, then the walls are the skin, and skin must be thickened, patched, and toughened if it is to keep out the mountain's knives of wind. You pause at one dwelling where the owner proudly shows you the rough plaster covering his timber beams. At first glance, it looks like dried mud, but touch it, and you feel the grainy resilience of a mixture. Clay scooped from the riverbank, moss plucked from damp stones, and yes, the unmistakable tang of animal dung. It is insulation both crude and ingenious. Packed thick, it seals cracks where drafts would creep in, trapping warmth inside. Archaeological surveys of alpine farmhouses confirm this method. Layers of clay and straw, sometimes dung, were slapped onto outer walls like primitive plaster. Over winters, the mixture hardened into a solid crust, repaired again each year. Chroniclers from the 15th century described such houses as earth-smeared hovels, but for those within, they were fortresses. The insult of mud on your walls was outweighed by the luxury of not shivering through every night. Step inside, and you notice the effect. The air, though still smoky, feels less biting than in huts without such care. The moss lining the cracks even gives off a faint, earthy scent, as if the forest itself has joined the fight to keep out the frost. One villager grins, saying the moss is the mountain's gift returned to itself. You chuckle, imagining a mountain lending pieces of its own skin to help humans endure. Curious details emerge as you wander. Some households lined walls with woven mats of reeds or straw, layered like thatch turned sideways. Others nailed animal hides to inner beams, fur facing inward to trap air. A particularly odd method involved stuffing sheep's wool into gaps, sealing it with resin. Imagine the texture soft fibers mixed with sticky sap, a strange but effective filler. Travelers recorded their astonishment, some even claiming the huts looked fur-lined from the inside. Scholars remain divided about how effective these insulation methods were. Some argue they provided only minimal relief, pointing to constant complaints of drafts in medieval letters and accounts. Others counter that even a few degrees of warmth could mean the difference between life and frostbite. Standing here now, you sense that perfection was never the goal. Incremental comfort, piled layer upon layer, was victory enough. You crouch near the floor and notice another trick. Rushes spread thick across the ground, then covered with clay to form a crude insulation against frozen earth. In some homes, wooden planks were added, but where wood was scarce, villagers made do with mud and straw. You run your hand along the floor and feel how it stays just a bit warmer than bare stone. Not luxury, just less misery. A neighbor proudly shows you his roof, weighted with heavy stones to hold the thatch in place against gales. Snow piles high above, but instead of breaking through, it compresses the thatch, adding its own insulation. Irony again, the very element that threatens survival becomes a shield. You climb the ladder to the loft and feel the thick air pressed beneath the snowpack. It is dim, heavy, and oddly still, but warmer than open rafters would allow. Villagers invent small rituals around these practices. One woman tells you she sprinkles dried herbs into the clay mixture before plastering, believing the scent wards off sickness. Another insists that dung from cows keeps walls stronger than dung from goats. Cow heat holds better, she laughs. Strange theories, perhaps, but in a world of guesswork, every superstition becomes a building code. The sensory details are raw. You smell the tang of manure mixed with clay, earthy and acrid. You touch moss damp against the beams, soft and spongy. You hear the faint creak of reed mats shifting when the wind howls outside. Each sensation grounds you in a truth. Walls here are not lifeless barriers, but living collages of forest, field, and farm. Night falls, and you huddle with a family near their insulated wall. The fire burns low, yet the cold does not pierce as sharply as in huts less fortified. A child presses her cheek against the moss-lined beam, giggling at its softness. Her father pats the wall proudly, calling it our second cloak. You realize the wall is not just construction, it is companionship, a silent ally that holds the night at bay. Yet dangers persist. Clay crumbles, moss dries, dung cracks. Each spring, villagers scrape and repair, patching holes, layering anew. There is no finish, only maintenance. One misstep, one neglected wall, and frost would slip in, stealing heat, stealing health. Their survival is a constant patchwork, never complete, always renewed. One curious custom persists in local lore. When plastering walls for winter, families left a small stone embedded near the doorway. They called it the cold catcher, believing it trapped frost spirits before they could enter. Scholars dismiss it as superstition, but you smile, imagining a tiny prison for winter spirits sealed inside a lump of clay. Step outside once more. Snow lies heavy, stars glitter overhead, and the village glows faintly with smoke curling upward. Each hut looks fragile, but you now know their secret strength. They are patched with clay, moss, dung, wool, reeds, whatever the mountain provides. It may look crude, but within those patched walls, families sleep warmer, laugh louder, endure longer. Tomorrow you'll leave the safety of huts and follow hunters into forests, their bows drawn tight against the silence of snow. But tonight, remember this. Survival is not always about strength or bravery. Sometimes it is about clay under your fingernails, moss stuffed into cracks, and dung plastered onto walls. It is about building a second skin, imperfect but resilient, against the endless cold. The walls patched with clay and moss still cling to your senses as you step out into the brittle air. Tonight, though, you do not follow the hum of spinning wheels or the glow of hearths. Instead, you hear the faint call of horns echoing through the valley. Hunters are gathering. In the heart of winter, when herds thin and grain runs low, the forest becomes both larder and gamble. To stalk prey in snow is to pit human patience against animal instinct and the mountain itself. You walk with them into the trees. The snow crunches louder here, muffled only by the whisper of pines. Men carry bows strung tight, spears tipped with iron, and knives slung at their belts. Dogs pad silently at their sides, fur bristling against the cold. The air is sharp with resin and the faint musk of animals. Medieval chronicles mention winter hunts as essential, especially in Alpine and Carpathian regions. While nobles boasted of grand chases with hawks and hounds, peasants relied on humbler, more dangerous methods: snares, pits, and patient stalking. For these villagers, meat was survival, not sport. A single deer could feed dozens, its hide sewn into boots, its fat rendered into candles. You notice the hunter's clothing: patched wool layered with fur, boots wrapped in strips of hide. One man wears gloves lined with hare's fur, his fingers steady on the bowstring. Another carries a horn slung across his back, carved with patterns of animals. When blown, its deep note will carry across the forest, calling others to help drag down prey or warn of danger. Curious techniques come into view: One hunter scatters ash onto the snow, dulling its glare so he can track without being blinded. Another chews pine resin to keep his mouth moist in the cold air, a trick said to steady breathing. These are small, practical details passed down through generations, unrecorded in books but vital to survival. You crouch with them near a frozen clearing. The silence is absolute. Breath curls into the air, dogs twitch, ears pricked. Then a rustle. A stag emerges, antlers stark against the snow. For a moment it is beauty itself. Strength, grace, resilience. Then the bowstring snaps, the arrow flies, and the spell breaks. The animal falls. The silence returns, heavier than before. The sensory assault is vivid. The hiss of the arrow, the thud as it strikes, the steaming breath of the dying stag against cold air. You smell iron, sharp and raw. The hunters move quickly, muttering thanks to God, to saints, to the mountain itself. Death here is never casual. It is negotiation. They believe each kill must be acknowledged, lest misfortune follow. Folklore backs this belief. Villagers whisper that forest spirits watch every hunt. Some tales describe a white hart, a mystical deer whose death would curse a hunter's line. Others warn of wolves sent as punishments for arrogance. Scholars remain uncertain whether these legends were remnants of pagan beliefs or moral tales layered onto survival. What you see, though, is reverence in every gesture, hands pressed briefly to foreheads, murmurs of apology to the fallen beast. Dogs whine as the hunters skin the carcass. Their knives flash, their hands red but steady. The hide is rolled, the meat divided, the organs set aside for broth. Nothing is wasted. Even bones will become tools or broth, sinews twisted into cords. The forest provides, but only if taken with precision. A curious tidbit arises here. In some mountain villages, hunters rubbed fresh deer blood onto children's cheeks, believing it granted strength against winter. The practice sounds macabre to modern ears, but to them it was blessing, not horror, a way of binding life into fragile bodies. The hunters move deeper, searching for smaller prey. Snares are checked, rabbits caught in loops of twisted cord, foxes lured into pits baited with scraps. The dogs bark sharply at tracks crossing the snow wild boar, dangerous even now. The men hesitate. Boars are fierce, tusks capable of gutting a man. But hunger pushes courage forward. Spears lower, shouts rise, and soon the forest explodes in chaos. You hear the clash of bodies, the squeal of the boar, the shouts of men. Snow sprays, dogs leap, spears thrust. Finally, silence returns once more, broken only by heavy breathing. The boar lies still. Relief floods the hunters' faces. Tonight, the village will feast richer than usual. Scholars disagree on how often such large kills occurred. Some argue they were rare, treasured events, while others suggest mountain folk became adept at boar hunting. Either way, when success came, it was celebrated. Meat roasted on spits, fat dripped into fires, and bellies filled more than usual. The sensory overload continues. You smell the musk of the boar, feel the steam rising from its body into frozen air, hear the panting of dogs. The hunter's laughter is shaky, edged with exhaustion, but real. For a moment, they have bested not only the beast, but the mountain itself. As they drag the carcass back, you notice rituals of sharing. The best cuts are divided carefully, ensuring no family is left hungry. A portion is offered to the priest, another to the poorest widow. In these harsh winters, generosity is not charity, it is insurance. Those who share today will be helped tomorrow. One unusual belief lingers in their words. Leaving a scrap of meat for wolves ensures they do not attack livestock. Whether practical appeasement or superstition, it reveals the delicate dance with predators who also stalk these forests. The mountain is not only cold, it is alive with hungers besides human. Back in the village, smoke rises from hearths as meat sizzles. Children's eyes widen at the sight, elders murmur blessings, and dogs circle eagerly. The smell of roasting boar fills the lanes, thick and rich. For one night, the village forgets hunger. Stories flow as freely as broth, laughter echoing off walls plastered with clay and moss. Step aside and watch. The hunters lean back, exhaustion etched on their faces, but pride glows too. They have risked frost, beasts, and spirits, and they have returned with life carved from death. Tomorrow, hunger will gnaw again, but tonight, mouths are full and hearts are lighter. As you leave the fire's glow, you glance back toward the forest. Its dark silence looms, waiting. Tomorrow, someone else will risk its depths. For now, let the memory hold. Boughs snapping, dogs barking, blood steaming, and meat roasting. The winter hunt, brutal, sacred, necessary as survival written in snow and shadow. The scent of roasted boar still clings to your clothes when dawn spills pale light over the ridges. Yet not all bellies in the village are full, and not every family owns hunters strong enough to bring meat home. For most, survival rests not on great kills, but on what can be coaxed, stored, or bartered through the endless months of cold. Tonight, you step into the quieter rhythm of preservation, the ancient craft of stretching food long past its natural life. Inside a hut, the air is smoky, thick with the smell of fish hanging above the fire. Rows of trout and perch dangle from rafters, their skins hardened by weeks of slow curing. You run your hand beneath one and feel the oily drip that once fell steadily, now dried into leathery resilience. This, you realize, is winter's true bounty, not fresh meals, but foods hardened into endurance. Medieval records from alpine monasteries describe villagers delivering wheels of cheese, barrels of salted meat, and sacks of dried beans in late autumn, the last chance before snow-blocked roads. These stores were tallied, measured, and guarded like treasure. For peasants, preservation was wealth. A wheel of cheese was not simply food, it was insurance, protection against hunger's claws. You notice how everything is transformed by salt. Hams hang thick and dark, crusted with white crystals. Meat once soft now feels like stone, its surface tough but safe from rot. Salt, expensive and traded across frozen rivers, is rationed carefully. Every grain rubbed into flesh is an act of calculation. How much to preserve, how much to sell, how much to risk saving for spring. One curious practice stands out. Some villagers stored apples in barrels of straw, buried deep in snowbanks. The fruit, hidden from light and air, remained edible for months, a rare sweetness when all else was sour and salted. Imagine the delight of biting into a crisp apple in January, when the world outside is barren. Children, folklore says, treated such apples as near magical, gifts from saints carried through the snow. Cheese, too, tells its own story. Wheels stacked in corners grow hard and sharp with age. The smell is pungent, almost overwhelming, but when grated into porridge or melted into broth, it transforms bland meals into feasts. Travelers wrote of cheeses so tough they doubled as stools until chipped apart with knives. You smile at the thought, food and furniture in one. The sensory details overwhelm you. The smoke of fish drying pricks your eyes. The salt of ham stings your tongue when you lick your lips. The sharp tang of cheese fills the air. Even beans in clay jars have a faint, earthy aroma, promising sustenance once boiled. This is the smell of survival, pungent, heavy, reassuring. Not all methods were successful. Grain spoiled in damp cellars, meat rotted if salt ran short. Oral traditions speak of hunger bread, loaves baked from bark and ground acorns when wheat was gone. Chronicles mention years of famine when even dogs and cats vanished from villages, eaten in desperation. Scholars debate the extent of such accounts. Were they exaggerations or grim truth? The uncertainty lingers, but the memory-shaped rituals of over-preparation, the fear of scarcity guiding every salted ham and dried bean. One peculiar tidbit arises in mountain lore. Villagers sometimes froze milk into blocks during the coldest weeks, storing them like white stones to be thawed later. The taste must have been strange, but in hunger, novelty mattered little. Frozen milk was still milk, and milk meant life. Families also brewed small casks of beer or cider, not for merriment alone but as liquid food. Water from wells often froze or turned foul. Weak ale, brewed from barley or rye, was safer to drink. Children sipped it daily. The alcohol mild but the calories real. Even in smoky huts, mugs of ale were comfort as well as sustenance. Step back and look at the storerooms. Barrels stacked to ceilings, nets of dried herbs hanging from beams, jars sealed with wax. Each one is a story of labor already done, a promise that tomorrow will not starve. You feel the weight of these stores, not just their heft, but the comfort they bring. To open a barrel and find beans intact is to breathe easier for one more week. Scholars still discuss how communities shared preserved food. Some evidence suggests lending and borrowing of cheese wheels or smoked meat was common, debts repaid after thaw. Others argue each family guarded its stores fiercely, sharing only at feasts or funerals. Perhaps both are true, depending on the year. Scarcity makes generosity a gamble, yet generosity also keeps alliances strong. Night falls, and you watch a mother chip at a block of salted pork. She drops the piece into a pot, the fat melting slowly into broth. The taste is strong, almost harsh, but warmth spreads from every sip. Around the table, children slurp eagerly, not minding the salt that stings their lips. You realize the true miracle is not flavor but endurance. Every chew is victory over famine. One unusual superstition surfaces during supper. Before breaking into a new wheel of cheese, the eldest makes the sign of the cross on its rind. This, they say, prevents sickness from creeping in. Whether prayer or habit, the gesture transforms food into blessing, turning necessity into ritual. As you leave, the cold air outside feels sharper after the smoky warmth. You glance back at the huts, knowing each holds its treasure meat, cheese, beans, apples, all hidden like jewels against the long night. Tomorrow, you'll walk into the world of craft again, seeing how tools and trades sustained villagers when fields slept under snow. But tonight, let the image linger. Hams hanging like dark lanterns, fish drying in smoke, barrels stacked like fortresses, and children biting into apples as if tasting sunlight itself. The smell of smoked fish and salted pork still lingers as you step into a quieter lane. Tonight, though, you find not storerooms of food but workshops glowing faintly, each hut alive with the scrape of knives, the clink of metal, the rasp of whetstones. When fields lie buried in snow and flocks stay penned indoors, the villagers turn to craft. Winter is not only endurance, it is also creation, a season when hands shape tools, mend clothing, and carve meaning into wood. Step into the first hut. A man sits hunched over a bench, a whetstone sliding rhythmically along his blade. Sparks glint as he sharpens a scythe, though no grass will be cut for months. He explains softly, winter is the only time to prepare. For once spring arrives, there is no leisure for sharpening. Tools must be ready before snow melts, or fields will be lost. You run your hand along the blade's cool edge, feeling the precision born of long evenings spent in smoke and silence. Chronicles from Alpine abbeys mention that peasants often owed part of their rent in tools, crafted during winter months. Axes, hoes, even nails were delivered alongside grain or wool. For families, this meant survival twice over. The tools kept their own fields productive, while spares paid debts to lords. The winter workshop was as important as the winter storeroom. Look to another corner. A boy no older than 10 hammers a strip of iron, sparks leaping around his face. His father guides his hands, correcting the angle of each strike. The smell of hot metal mingles with smoke, sharp and acrid. You realize this is not only labor but apprenticeship. Skills must be passed on during the long dark, when time stretches wide enough for patience. One curious practice emerges here. Villagers sometimes used bones from animals, not only for broth but as raw material. Carved shin bones became handles for knives, antlers shaped into buttons or combs. Archaeologists have found such fragments in alpine sites, smoothed by countless touches. Nothing went to waste, not food, not hide, not bone. Even death became tool. Step into another hut, and the rhythm shifts. Here, wood rules. A man carves spoons from birch, his knife gliding smoothly, curls of pale wood falling to the floor. His daughter beside him carves a toy horse for her younger brother, its crude legs charming in their simplicity. You can almost hear the boy's laugh when he receives it, the joy of play born from scraps. Scholars note that winter was often when religious carvings flourished. Crosses, saints, and charms were etched into wood, tucked into rafters or worn on belts. Some argue these were tokens of piety. Others suggest they were protective talismans. You see one hanging above the door, a rough carving of street. Nicholas, patron of travellers, its edges smoothed by countless hands. In another hut, women bend over looms. Threads stretch taut, shuttles glide, and the clack of wood fills the room like steady percussion. Wool becomes cloth, cloth becomes cloaks and tunics. You run your fingers over the fabric rough, scratchy, but thick enough to block wind. The weavers' eyes glint in the firelight, their feet tapping treadles, their bodies swaying in rhythm. For them, weaving is not only craft but music, a dance of hands and feet keeping time with survival. One quirky tidbit surfaces in village lore. Some women wove secret symbols into hems, knots, crosses, even animals meant to protect wearers from misfortune. A cloak might carry both warmth and blessing, unseen but felt. You smile, imagining a child wrapped not only in wool but in a mother's hidden hope. The sensory world of craft is vivid. Sparks hiss as iron meets stone, curls of wood crunch underfoot, wool fibers tickle your skin, smoke stings your eyes. Each hut hums with its own rhythm, each rhythm part of a larger symphony of survival. Outside, the night is silent, but inside, every corner thrums with creation. Scholars debate whether these crafts were purely utilitarian or also artistic. Some argue peasants had no time for art. Others point to decorated spoons, painted sleds, and embroidered hems as proof that beauty mattered even in hardship. Perhaps necessity and artistry were never separate. In winter's long nights, the line between tool and ornament blurred. A spoon carved with a spiral still fed porridge, but it also delighted the hand that held it. You pause beside a woman embroidering linen with red thread. The pattern is simple geometric diamonds, but her stitches are meticulous. She explains that red thread wards off evil, keeping sickness from the body it covers. Her daughter watches, learning each stitch, memorizing not just the technique but the belief. Embroidery here is not decoration alone. It is a spell, stitched into fabric by tired hands. In another corner, a man repairs harnesses, leather stretched taut across his knees. He scrapes and oils it, the smell rich and sharp. Horses will need it come spring, hauling ploughs and sleds. Without leatherwork now, fields will fail later. The work is silent, steady, almost meditative. A curious detail arises from local chronicles. Villagers often carved elaborate sleds during winter, their sides decorated with spirals and animal motifs. When thaw arrived, these sleds were paraded proudly, symbols of resilience as well as transport. Archaeologists have unearthed fragments of such sleds, their carvings still faintly visible after centuries. Night deepens. Children drift to sleep beside baskets of shavings, their lullabies the scrape of knives and the hum of looms. Adults continue, their movements automatic, practiced through years of repetition. This is not drudgery alone, it is hope, crafted piece by piece, stitch by stitch, strike by strike. As you leave, the air outside feels emptier without the hum of craft. The huts glow faintly, each one a workshop, each one a forge of endurance. Tomorrow, you'll step into another layer of survival, the fragile balance of trade and barter that binds these villages together. But tonight, carry this vision: iron sparking, wood curling, wool weaving, red thread glinting in firelight. Craft in winter is more than occupation. It is defiance, creativity woven into necessity, proof that even in the coldest dark, hands still shape life. The scrape of iron on whetstone and the hum of looms still echo in your ears when the next morning dawns. But survival here is never about one family alone. It is about exchange, balance, the weaving together of many small threads into a net that holds the whole village. Tonight you step into the marketplace of necessity, not a grand square filled with coin and merchants, but a web of barter, promises, and trust stitched across frozen lanes. You follow villagers as they gather outside the chapel, their cloaks drawn close against the biting wind. No stalls, no awnings, no bustling town crier, just neighbours standing in a circle, goods in their arms. One man sets down a bundle of firewood, another lays out strips of smoked fish. A woman unfolds a length of cloth, rough but sturdy. The air hums with murmurs, offers, refusals, bargains struck with nods and handshakes. Historical records from mountain parishes rarely list markets in the formal sense, but they note debts settled in goods, wool repaid with salt, cheese exchanged for iron, herbs given in return for firewood. In these villages, coin mattered little. What mattered was balance, no one hoarding while another starved, no family left without fuel when snow pressed hardest. You notice curious details. A man offers a carved spoon in exchange for nettle tea. The spoon is simple, yet polished smooth, its handle etched with spirals. Another woman trades a pouch of garlic for a rabbit pelt. Each good is measured not by weight alone, but by effort, the time it took to carve, to dry, to salt, to cure. The negotiations are quiet, almost gentle, as though everyone understands that too much greed would crack the fragile trust holding them together. One peculiar custom arises here. Villagers sometimes exchanged future promises rather than present goods. A woman might say, "I will give you wool come spring for your salt today." The promise is sealed by clasping hands or, in some cases, by placing a token, perhaps a carved bead or a marked stick, into the other's hand. Chronicles describe these pledge tokens, often carved with symbols, kept until the debt was repaid. You smile at the thought of such primitive contracts, binding not by ink, but by memory and reputation. The sensory world is subtle but sharp. You hear the crunch of boots shifting in snow as villagers shuffle goods. You smell smoked fish, tangy cheese, pungent herbs mingling in the cold air. You feel the weight of a wool cloak draped over your shoulders, exchanged perhaps for half a sack of salt. Each sensation reminds you that survival here is tactile, intimate, grounded in touch and trust. Scholars still argue how much formal hierarchy influenced these exchanges. Some suggest local lords demanded a portion of all goods, tightening control. Others insist villages often handled trade independently, slipping under the eye of taxation during harsh months. Perhaps both are true, varying by valley, by lord, by winter. What you see tonight is simpler. Necessity dictating fairness, hunger moderating greed. A quirky tidbit comes to you from oral tradition. Children sometimes played market during these gatherings, mimicking adults by trading sticks for stones, pretending to haggle. Parents laughed, but the play taught them skills they would soon need. By adolescence, they too would stand in the circle, balancing promises against goods. As negotiations settle, you hear stories exchanged as readily as food. A woman from the next valley tells of wolves circling her barn. A man speaks of his cousin who slipped on the ice road. These stories are as valuable as salt or wood. Information itself is currency, shaping choices, guiding caution. The market, then, is more than trade. It is memory and warning shared in public. When deals conclude, villagers disperse quickly, goods bundled beneath cloaks. No coin clinks, no ledgers are written, but everyone knows who owes what, who gave what, who must repay when spring returns. The balance is fragile yet resilient, held together by community memory sharper than parchment. One strange practice you witness. Before leaving, villagers toss a scrap of food bread crust, fish bone into the snow. They say it is for the hungry spirits of the mountain. a small bribe to ensure safe return. Scholars debate whether this is remnant paganism or harmless superstition, but you watch the act with quiet respect. Even in trade, survival demands appeasement of unseen forces. The sensory aftertaste of the market lingers. The feel of cold wool exchanged for salt, the smell of garlic on your fingers, the weight of promises carried like invisible burdens. You realize that barter is not only about goods, it is about trust, the fragile web that keeps neighbors from becoming rivals. As night deepens, fires glow in every hut. Inside, families eat meals flavored with new goods, fish salted with borrowed brine, bread baked with grain from another household, herbs steeped into tea to soothe coughs. The market lingers in every bite, every sip, every garment mended. Survival here is not solitary, it is communal, stitched together by exchanges whispered in the snow. Step back into the night. The wind whistles through narrow lanes, carrying faint echoes of laughter and chatter. Tomorrow, you'll step into the shadowed heart of superstition again, exploring how villagers explained the dangers they could not mend with salt or wool. But tonight, hold on to this image. A circle of cloaked figures trading fish for cloth, cheese for firewood, promises for trust. No coins shine here, only faces lit by necessity, weaving survival thread by thread through barter in the snow. The memory of barter fish for cloth, salt for wool still lingers as you wander through the snow-drifted lanes. Yet trade and craft cannot answer every question. What of sudden illness that herbs cannot cure? What of avalanches that strike without warning? Or storms that swallow barns whole? For these gaps, where human skill falters, villagers lean into another layer of survival, belief in omens, rituals, and the unseen forces that haunt their valleys. Step into a hut just as twilight fades. Inside, a grandmother ties sprigs of juniper above the doorway. The sharp scent cuts through the smoke, earthy and biting. She mutters words softly, half prayer, half charm. As this wood burns clean, so may sickness burn away. Her granddaughter watches, wide-eyed. The action seems small, but it carries the weight of centuries. Medieval chronicles often mocked such rustic superstitions. Priests railed against villagers mixing holy prayers with old forest charms. Yet ethnographers studying alpine communities centuries later noted how persistent these practices remained. In places where death prowled at every door, people hedged bets cross in one hand, amulet in the other. You notice a curious detail. On the hearth, a small clay figure sits, crude and rough. It is shaped like a bird, its wings outstretched. The family calls it their storm keeper. Whenever winds howl, they sprinkle salt around it, believing the figure absorbs the storm's malice. Scholars debate whether such tokens are remnants of pagan idols or merely children's toys imbued with meaning. Whatever the origin, the family touches it reverently each night. The sensory world of these beliefs is powerful. You smell sage burning, its smoke pungent and thick. You hear the hiss as salt hits flames, sparks leaping upward. You feel the weight of charms carved from bone, polished by countless hands. Belief here is tangible, woven into every sense. Some omens guide daily choices. If crows circle low, villagers say snow will fall. If dogs howl at night, sickness approaches. If the moon wears a halo, frost will tighten its grip. These signs are debated even within families. Elders swear by them, while younger folk shrug. Yet in the silence of mountains, every shadow feels like a message, every sound like a warning. One peculiar tidbit from oral tradition. Mothers sometimes placed scissors, opened slightly, beneath infants' pillows. The sharp blades were thought to cut away evil dreams. Imagine laying your child to sleep with iron hidden beneath, trusting metal to defend against shadows. Strange, perhaps, but comforting in its own logic. Scholars remain divided on how much these practices shaped survival. Some argue they wasted precious resources, salt thrown into fire, herbs burned rather than brewed. Others suggest they provided crucial psychological comfort. giving people the courage to face storms and sickness. Watching tonight, you sense the latter. Belief warms hearts in ways furs cannot. You follow villagers outside into the night. The wind howls, snow swirls, and they gather in a circle, torches held high. They chant together, words lost in the storm. A priest might call it blasphemy, a historian might call it ritual, but to them, it is protection, binding community together against what they cannot see. One elder tells a tale. A boy once whistled in a blizzard, and the storm swallowed him whole. Since then, no one whistles at night in winter. Silence becomes law, carried forward as both superstition and safety. You realize that even if the story is invented, its lesson preserves caution. Sometimes, fear itself is a survival tool. Curious practices layer over faith. A woman buries bread crusts at crossroads, believing hungry spirits will eat and leave her family alone. A man hangs wolf skulls on his barn wall, claiming they scare away real wolves. Children laugh nervously at these displays, but they also learn. Lessons in fear are passed through objects as much as words. The sensory details remain vivid. Torches hiss as snowflakes melt against flames. The smell of burning juniper stings your throat. Shadows of villagers flicker across drifts, long and strange. You hear the low hum of voices chanting in unison, steady against the roar of wind. Belief feels heavy, filling the air like smoke. At dawn, the rituals end. Villagers return to huts, smoke trailing from chimneys. Did the charms work? Did the omens prove true? Perhaps it doesn't matter. What matters is that fear was named, shaped, and held in hand. In that act, people wrested power from the unknowable. One final superstition lingers in your mind. Villagers say if you dream of fire in winter, it means spring will come early. Last night, a boy whispered to his mother that he dreamed of flames leaping from the snow. She smiled, kissed his forehead, and told him warmth was on its way. Whether real prophecy or wishful thinking, the dream warmed them both. Step away now, leaving the whispers of charms and omens behind. Tomorrow you'll learn how children were taught, how knowledge and skills passed from hand to hand kept villages alive. But tonight, remember this. Survival is not only meat and moss, salt and stone. It is also faith in omens, the burning of herbs, the tying of charms, the chanting of words into the storm. Belief itself becomes insulation, a cloak woven not from wool but from hope. The smoke of burned juniper still clings to your clothes as dawn filters pale through narrow shutters. Today, though, the village hum is lighter, punctuated by children's laughter. You follow the sound into a hut where little ones crowd around their grandmother, eyes bright despite the biting cold. Tonight, you'll see how knowledge is passed in these mountain villages, education not through parchment and ink, but through memory, imitation, and play. The room is simple, a hearth glowing low, benches drawn close, scraps of wool and wood scattered about. No school desks, no slates, no quills. Yet lessons begin as surely as in any cathedral school, shaped by hands and voices. The grandmother draws patterns in ash on the hearthstone, triangles, circles, spirals. The children mimic her with sticks, their fingers smudged black. These shapes are not idle doodles. They are the seeds of letters, numbers, and stories remembered. Historical records from Alpine valleys rarely mention formal schooling for peasants before the late Middle Ages. Instead, education was household-based. Skills needed to survive spinning, hunting, farming, healing were passed down by demonstration and repetition. A boy learned to notch an arrow by watching his father shave wood. A girl learned to knead dough by pressing her palms into her mother's. Reading and writing were luxuries, but knowledge still flowed richly, oral and practical. You watch a father show his son how to mend a net. His hands, rough from years of work, move slowly, letting the boy see each knot tied, each loop tightened. The boy fumbles, tangles the cord, grows frustrated. The father chuckles, untangles it, and sets him back to try again. Patience is its own pedagogy here. Every mistake is a step toward memory. Curious customs appear. Children often practiced with miniature tools, tiny spindles carved from sticks, small bows fashioned from willow, little wooden plows. These toys were lessons disguised, teaching coordination and strength. Travelers once mocked them as crude playthings. Today, historians recognize them as training grounds. Imagine a girl spinning clumsy threads at 8, only to weave sturdy cloth by 12. One peculiar tidbit survives in folklore. Children sometimes played a game called Snow House, building miniature huts of packed snow, complete with doors and windows. Inside, they mimicked adults tending tiny fires of twigs, cooking with stones. What seemed like play was rehearsal for life. By copying, they learned the rhythms that would one day keep them alive. The sensory details are tender. You hear the giggles of children as they chase each other through the snow, shouts echoing down narrow lanes. You smell bread baking as mothers slip loaves into ovens, teaching daughters when dough is ready by scent, not recipe. You feel the rough wood of practice tools, the cold bite of snow against fingers as children shape their play huts. Learning here is tangible, physical, etched into senses as much as minds. Scholars debate how much literacy existed in such remote places. Some argue peasants remained almost entirely illiterate. Others point to marginal notes in prayer books, scraps of parchment preserved with names and dates. Perhaps literacy was rare but not absent. Oral tradition, however, was the true textbook. Proverbs, riddles, and songs carried wisdom across generations. Never whistle at night taught caution in storms. A hungry goat eats its rope, warned against neglecting animals. Each saying was both lesson and lullaby. Inside one hut, you hear an elder recite riddles. "What has no legs but travels far?" he asks. The children shout, "The sun!" He grins, pleased. Riddles sharpen minds, teaching children to see patterns, to think beyond the obvious. Oral puzzles like these are scattered through medieval manuscripts, proof that mountain children grew up surrounded by wordplay as well as work. Education also carried morality. Tales warned against greed, praised generosity, mocked laziness. Stories of saints who shared their cloaks or beasts punished for arrogance doubled as lessons in virtue. A child learned not only to mend a net, but also to share fish caught with it. The values were as practical as the skills. Community first, survival together. A curious detail lingers from parish records. Some priests ran winter schools when passes closed and labour eased. Children gathered in chapels to learn prayers, hymns, and rudimentary Latin. The cold made ink freeze, but words still flowed scratched onto wax tablets, carved into wooden boards, murmured aloud until memorized. Even here, education flickered like fire, fragile but persistent. The sensory world deepens. You hear the rasp of chalk-like stones marking wooden boards, the low murmur of prayers repeated by children in chorus, the clap of hands when riddles are solved. You see smoke curling around rafters where herbs hang to dry, their scent mingling with bread baking in clay ovens. You feel the weight of wool cloaks wrapped around small shoulders as they sit close, eyes intent. One quirky superstition ties into learning. Villagers said a child who learned quickly had fire in the head. To protect them, parents sometimes sprinkled water over their hair at night, cooling the fire so it would not consume them. Scholars chuckle at the phrase, but you can picture parents watching proudly and nervously over a clever child. As dusk falls, the lessons shift to song. Children sing rhymes about animals, stars, and saints. Their voices are high, pure, carrying hope into smoky air. Mothers hum along, fathers smile, elders nod. Education ends not in silence, but in harmony. You realize now that learning here is not about parchment or ink. It is about continuity, threading skills, stories, morals, and riddles into young minds until they too can spin, mend, hunt, and tell. In these mountains, survival is not inherited wealth, but inherited memory. Each gesture, each word, each game carries knowledge across the long winter. As you step back into the snow, the children's laughter trails behind you. Tomorrow, you will turn toward the dangers that stalked every village, the wolves that prowled forests and the men who sometimes proved as dangerous as beasts. But tonight, hold this vision. A grandmother drawing spirals in ash, a boy fumbling with a net, a girl weaving red thread, all of them learning through play and repetition. Education in winter is not formal, but it is essential knowledge pressed into hands and hearts, keeping life alive through the coldest nights. The laughter of children fades as you drift toward the forest edge. The air grows still, heavy with a silence that feels watchful. For all their skills, prayers, and songs, villagers lived under constant threat, not just from storms or hunger, but from predators that prowled the mountains. Tonight you walk into that darker realm, where glowing eyes gleam between trees and even human neighbors might carry danger in their hearts. The first sound is a howl. Low, mournful, it rolls across the valley like smoke. Wolves. Every villager knows the note, and every child grows up taught to fear it. The forest around you suddenly feels alive with movement. You picture yellow eyes, ribs showing under coarse fur, teeth white against the snow. Wolves in winter are desperate, driven by hunger to creep near barns and huts. Chronicles across Europe describe entire herds lost in single nights, and peasants armed with torches and pitchforks driving packs back into the dark. You follow men to the barn. They carry iron-tipped spears, axes, and blazing brands. The animals inside shift nervously, sensing danger. The air is thick with dung, smoke, and fear. One man mutters a prayer to Saint Hubert, protector of hunters. Another spits into the snow, an old charm against beasts. The torches flare, casting long shadows. For a moment, you imagine yourself as the wolf, watching from tree line, waiting for a chance to strike. A curious detail surfaces from oral tradition. Villagers believed wolves would not attack if they heard bells ringing. So, sometimes, men fastened small bells to cattle, or even wore them on belts during night patrols. The sound, they hoped, would confuse predators, or perhaps echo holy chimes strong enough to ward off evil. Scholars debate whether wolves were truly frightened or whether the noise simply warned humans of approach. Either way, bells became a fragile armor of sound. The sensory world here is raw. You hear the hiss of torches, the restless stamp of hooves, the distant crack of branches in the forest. You smell smoke mingled with sweat, sharp and acrid. You feel the cold bite against exposed skin, every nerve alert. Danger is not abstract, it presses close, breathing just beyond the fire's edge. But wolves were not the only predators. Bears, too, haunted these ranges, emerging groggy from dens in early thaws. A hungry bear tearing through a grain store or sheepfold could ruin a family. Stories abound of men who faced them with only spears, some victorious, others never seen again. Children grew up on warnings. Never wander into forests alone. Never leave barns unbarred. And then there are the human threats. Bandits, raiders, even neighbors desperate enough to steal. Chronicles tell of villages raided not just by wolves but by men disguised as them, cloaked in furs, howling to terrify. Some scholars argue these tales are exaggerations, moral fables of greed. Others point to evidence of rural banditry that grew worse during harsh winters, when hunger drove people to violence. Either way, fear of human predators was as strong as fear of beasts. One peculiar tidbit lingers in folk memory. Villagers sometimes hung wolf skulls or bear claws above doors, believing the trophies warded off both animal and human enemies. The sight of sharp teeth and bone gleaming in firelight was meant to frighten away ill will. Archaeologists have indeed found such remains nailed into rafters, half trophy, half talisman. The sensory weight deepens. Imagine stepping outside at night, the snow crunching too loud, your breath clouding too visible. Every shadow could be fur or thief. Every snap of twig could mean danger. The silence itself becomes menacing, a cloak under which predators move unseen. How did villagers endure this constant threat? Community defense. Men rotated night watches, circling barns, patrolling lanes with torches. Dogs barked warnings, their growls echoing like alarms. Fires were kept burning brighter near edges of the village, not only for warmth, but as boundaries of light. Oral accounts describe the night ring, a perimeter of watchfires blazing through storms, reminding beasts and men alike that the village was awake. Still, tragedy struck. Stories remain of children snatched at dusk, of shepherds found only by blood on snow, of barns broken into with nothing left alive inside. These stories are told with solemnity, not to entertain but to warn. Scholars argue about exaggeration, yet you see the impact. Every door barred, every family alert, every child taught fear early. Curious rituals aim to protect against this. Some villagers carved crosses into barn doors, mixing holy symbols with wolf's hair nailed into wood. Others smeared pig's blood on thresholds, believing its scent warned off predators. A strange mixture of faith and feral logic shaped these defenses. You step back now, listening as the forest quiets. The wolves' howls fade, perhaps driven off for tonight. The torches dim. Men return to huts, shoulders heavy, but barns still full. Survival here is not victory over predators, but stalemate, one more night kept safe, one more dawn won. Scholars still argue whether fear of wolves shaped medieval culture more than hunger itself. You sense the answer is entwined. Hunger made wolves bolder, wolves made hunger sharper. Together, they haunted every winter. As dawn breaks, children run laughing again, their fears temporarily forgotten. But you know the memory of howls lingers in every adult ear. Predators, whether of fur or flesh, were woven into survival as tightly as snow, fire, or salt. Tomorrow you'll return to quieter matters, watching how villagers marked time in endless winters, how calendars of saints and stars shaped their patience. But tonight, let the image settle. Glowing eyes at forest's edge, bells chiming faintly on cattle, torches flaring against the dark, and villagers whispering prayers to hold off hunger and teeth alike. The echo of wolf howls lingers as dawn creeps over the mountains. Yet after a night of fear, the village greets the pale sun with quiet rituals that help them measure time. In a world where seasons rule survival, keeping track of days, feasts and fasts matters as much as storing food or guarding barns. Tonight you drift into the rhythm of calendars, saints, and stars, the unseen threads that help people endure winters so long they seem endless. Step inside the chapel. Its stone walls hold the day's first warmth as a handful of villagers kneel, murmuring prayers. The priest raises his voice, reciting the feast day of a saint. It may be Saint Agnes in January, Saint Blaise in February, or Saint Joseph in March. Each name is a marker on the long road of winter. Families do not speak of months so much as of feast days, after Candlemas or before St. Matthias. This is how time is carried across the cold. Historical records reveal how deeply rural calendars relied on church feasts. Monastic chronicles in alpine valleys list saints' days more reliably than lunar cycles. For villagers, the church's rhythm was their clock. Advent, Epiphany, Lent, Easter. Even in frozen valleys, the bells marked progress, tolling out hope with each chime. You notice curious traditions tied to these markers. At Candlemas, villagers carried candles through lanes, believing the light blessed homes and drove away illness. At St. Blaise's feast, they had their throats blessed with crossed candles, hoping to ward off coughs that lingered in smoky huts. Each ritual was practical in its own symbolic way, medicine of faith when herbs and broth failed. One unusual detail emerges in folk practice. Villagers sometimes marked beams of their huts with chalk crosses on Epiphany, writing the year alongside initials for the three magi C plus M plus B. They believed this protected against misfortune. Archaeologists have found faint carvings of such markings in old timber houses, proof that the passage of time was scratched not just on parchment but on doorways. The sensory world of timekeeping is rich. You hear bells ringing over snow, their tones muffled yet steady. You smell melted wax dripping down carried candles, sweet and smoky. You feel the rough chalk in your hand as you mark beams. Time becomes tactile, embodied in rituals more than numbers. Scholars debate how much villagers tracked celestial movements. Some argue peasants read the skies closely, noting solstices, moon phases, and stars to predict weather. Others suggest these readings were blended with folklore, less precise astronomy than rural wisdom. What you see is a mix. Farmers glance at moon halos to guess frost. Shepherds follow star paths to time lambing. Sky and saints intertwine, guiding choices day by day. One quirky tidbit surfaces in oral lore. Children learned rhymes about months, not through numbers but through labor. When the raven caws thrice sow oats, one rhyme said. When the snowdrifts crack, shear sheep. These verses kept rhythm alive in memory, tying work to sound and season. Time is also marked through fasting and feasting. On certain days, meat is forbidden, replaced by fish or thin porridge. On others, festivals break the monotony with dances, games, and shared bread. Even in famine years, families hoarded enough to celebrate a saint's feast, if only with a sweetened loaf. To skip entirely would invite ill fortune, or so they believed. You sit at a table where children scratch notches into a wooden board, one for each day since Christmas. Their mother explains this is their counting stick. When the last notch is cut, spring should be near. Such sticks survive in museums, primitive calendars carved by children's hands, bridging the endless cold with visible progress. The sensory detail deepens. You feel the groove of notches beneath your fingers, rough and uneven. You hear children chant feast names as they carve Saint Agnes, Saint Blaise, Saint Matthias. You smell ink as the priest notes dates in his ledger, faint against parchment but sharp in memory. A peculiar belief lingers here. Some villagers swore that roosters crowing at midnight marked the turning of the year. Families gathered in barns to listen on New Year's Eve, straining ears for the sound. If no crow came, they feared misfortune. Scholars still puzzle over this. Was it rural humor, ritual, or simple tradition? Whatever its origin, you can imagine the tension as entire families leaned into silence, waiting for one bird to break the year. As winter drags, calendars become hope. Each saint's day is another step toward thaw. Each candle lit at Candlemas is another flicker against despair. Time itself is treated like a resource measured, rationed, savored until the earth softens again. You leave the chapel and look up. Stars glitter sharp in the night sky. A shepherd points to Orion, saying his belt guides travelers across snow. Another gestures at the Pleiades, warning that their brightness foretells late frost. The heavens are a second calendar, written above huts patched with clay and moss. The debate among scholars continues. Were peasants astronomers in disguise, or simply storytellers reading meaning into the night? Standing here, you sense both truths. Stars are not science alone. They are companions. Their patterns give shape to nights that might otherwise dissolve into endless dark. As you return to the village, bells toll softly from the chapel tower. Children finish their counting sticks. Families whisper prayers. Elders mark beams with chalk. Time moves forward, slow but steady. Tomorrow, you'll walk into the quieter rhythms of sickness and healing, exploring how villagers coped with fevers, coughs, and injuries in the dead of winter. But tonight, hold on to this. Candles carried through snow, bells ringing against silence, stars glittering like beads strung across black skies. In the coldest mountains, time itself became a companion, marking survival not just in days endured, but in days remembered, named, and blessed. The bells from the chapel fade, but inside the huts another rhythm takes over, the sound of coughing. You hear it first as a low rasp from one corner, then as a sharp bark from another house. Winter does not only bring hunger and wolves, it brings sickness. In smoky air, in damp corners, illness spreads easily. Tonight you step into the fragile world of medieval medicine, half herbal craft, half whispered prayer, always uncertain. Step into a hut where a boy lies wrapped in wool blankets, his face pale, breath shallow. His mother crushes dried herbs in a mortar, the pestle's rhythm steady. She mixes thyme and honey, pours hot water, and presses the steaming cup to her son's lips. The scent of thyme fills the air, sharp and medicinal. He sips, coughing between swallows. You realize this is both remedy and comfort, warmth sliding into chilled lungs. Historical records from alpine regions mention wise women who kept stores of herbs year-round. Their knowledge, passed down orally, was vital in villages far from monasteries or physicians. Plants like sage, chamomile, and yarrow grew in summer fields, dried and stored for winter. Mixed with honey, vinegar, or wine, they became cures for coughs, fevers, and wounds. Monks wrote treatises cataloguing herbs, but peasants often learned by trial and memory, each family holding recipes like secret treasure. One curious practice emerges here. For fevers, villagers sometimes placed onion skins in socks, believing the vapors drew illness from the body. Archaeologists can't prove its effectiveness, but the detail appears in oral lore again and again. Strange though it sounds, in a world without doctors nearby, even onion skins carried hope. The sensory world of sickness is heavy. You hear wheezing breaths, the crackle of fire stirred for warmth. You smell pungent vinegar used to wash sores, the sweet overlay of honey in teas, the acrid sting of burning herbs. You feel the clammy skin of fevered brows, cool cloths pressed against them. Every sense testifies to the fragility of life in winter huts. Scholars debate how effective these remedies truly were. Some argue herbs provided real relief. Sage has antibacterial properties. Honey soothes throats. Others insist most cures were placebo, their power psychological more than medicinal. What you see tonight is a blend. Whether or not the herb healed, the act of brewing, tending, and praying brought comfort, and perhaps that comfort was part of the cure. Step into another hut. A woman with a swollen ankle lies propped on furs. Her husband whines, strips of cloth soaked in wine around it, muttering that wine chases rot. The smell is sharp, heady. His hands are careful, though he lacks a surgeon's skill. In villages like this, surgery was limited to pulling teeth, lancing boils, or setting bones crudely. Anything more was left to chance or to God. One quirky tidbit from mountain lore. Some healers believed rubbing a toad's skin on warts would banish them. The idea sounds bizarre now, but the logic was sympathetic, magic-like cures-like. Such practices blur the line between medicine and ritual, science and superstition. The priest's role surfaces here too. He visits huts, carrying holy water and relics. He blesses the sick, sprinkles beds with water, lays relics of saints near fevered children. Whether the illness eased or not, families felt reassured. Scholars still argue whether this was spiritual comfort or distraction from effective care. But to villagers, faith and medicine were inseparable, prayer as vital as time. Sometimes, remedies combined both. A child's fever might be treated with chamomile tea, while a cross was drawn in ashes on his forehead. A wound might be washed with vinegar, then bound with cloth embroidered with protective symbols. Healing was layered, blending physical, spiritual, and symbolic measures until all avenues felt covered. The sensory imagery is vivid, the flicker of firelight over damp walls, the hiss of boiling kettles, the scent of rosemary hung above beds. You hear whispered prayers mixing with the rattle of coughs. You feel the uneven heat of bodies, one chilled, one burning. It is survival at its most fragile, where every breath feels borrowed. Scholars remain divided on mortality rates. Some claim most winter sicknesses were minor, endured with herbs and patience. Others highlight high infant mortality, noting how fragile the very young were in smoky, crowded huts. Perhaps both are true, some winters mild, others devastating. What is certain is the ever-present fear. A simple cough could become a death knell. Curious rituals aim to ward off illness. Families sometimes burned feathers, letting the acrid smoke drive away bad airs. Others buried eggshells outside huts, believing sickness would seep into the ground. These acts may sound futile, but they gave villagers a sense of agency against invisible threats. You watch one family prepare a poultice of bread and milk, spread over a boil on a man's arm. The smell is sour but oddly comforting. He winces as it's applied, then sighs in relief. You realize that even when remedies lacked medical truth, the act of care itself stitched bonds tighter, giving the sick reason to endure. Night deepens. In one hut, a child's cough eases, his breathing steadier. In another, silence falls heavy, and a family weeps softly. Death and recovery sit side by side, as familiar as neighbors. The village endures both, stitching stories of loss and survival into memory. One last superstition drifts through your thoughts. Villagers whispered that dreams of green fields in winter foretold recovery from illness. A mother leans close to her fevered child, asking what he dreamed. He murmurs of grass. She smiles through tears, believing it means he will live. Whether true or not, the dream carries hope, and hope itself is medicine. Step outside into the cold. Stars glimmer overhead, breath plumes silver. Behind each door lies a battle herbs against fever, prayers against coughs, hope against despair. Tomorrow, you'll turn to the role of storytelling and song, seeing how voices wove courage through nights darker than illness itself. But tonight, let this remain: the smell of thyme and vinegar, the warmth of honey tea, the murmur of prayers, and the fragile sound of a child's breath steadying against the cold. The bitter scent of vinegar and thyme still clings to you as you step back into the night air. Behind each hut's shuttered window, someone coughs, someone prays, someone whispers to a sleeping child. Yet even in sickness, villages find a way to keep spirits alive. Without song, without story, the nights would stretch too long, too silent, too heavy. Tonight you join the circle around a hearth, where voices rise not in argument or prayer, but in tale and melody. Inside the hut, the room glows golden with firelight. Families crowd together, grandparents hunched close to the flames, children curled against their parents' sides. The wind howls outside, but in here the sound is laughter, murmurs, the creak of benches as people lean in. An elder begins to speak, his voice rough but steady. The children hush at once. The tale begins. Historical records reveal that oral storytelling was one of the main threads binding medieval communities. Few could read, fewer still owned books, but every family carried sagas, fables, and saints' legends in memory. Monks copied Latin texts, but peasants told them in their own tongues, reshaped with every retelling. The stories you hear tonight are a patchwork of faith, folklore, and practical wisdom tales as much about survival as entertainment. The first story is of a saint who gave his cloak to a beggar in the snow, only to find the beggar was Christ in disguise. The moral is clear: generosity, even when food is scarce, brings blessings. Children listen wide-eyed, perhaps not fully understanding, but the rhythm of the tale sinks into them like warmth. Then comes a wilder tale, of a mountain spirit with hair of ice, who lured hunters astray with songs. If a man followed her voice, he vanished forever in the drifts. If he ignored it and kept to the path, he returned home safe. You smile at the lesson: discipline, not curiosity, saves lives in storms. Scholars debate whether this ice maiden figure is remnant pagan myth or Christianized allegory. Whatever its origin, the villagers believe enough to teach children: don't wander in blizzards. The sensory world here is rich. You hear the crackle of fire punctuating each pause in the tale. You smell smoke mingled with the faint tang of drying herbs overhead. You feel the warmth of bodies pressed together, breath clouding faintly in the chill. Storytelling is not just words, it is an atmosphere, a cocoon against despair. One quirky tidbit surfaces from oral lore. Storytellers sometimes placed iron in their pockets while spinning tales, believing it warded off lies. If the iron grew hot, the tale was false. Tonight, the elder taps a knife against his knee as he speaks. Is it habit, or is he testing the truth of his own story? The children watch the blade gleam, whispering nervously. Songs follow tales. A woman lifts her voice, low and clear, singing of spring's return. The melody is simple, repeated until everyone hums along. The words are less important than the rhythm, which carries hope like embers. Scholars remain divided about whether these songs were original village creations or echoes of older liturgical chants, perhaps both sacred and secular blending, just as herbs and prayers blended in healing. Children contribute too, reciting rhymes that serve as memory aids. One chants a verse about stars guiding shepherds, another sings of herbs that heal. These are lessons disguised as play, embedding knowledge in melody so it is not forgotten. Even in laughter, education continues. The sensory texture deepens. You hear voices weaving together, some smooth, some cracked with age. You feel benches creak as bodies sway in rhythm. You see sparks leap from the hearth, briefly illuminating faces caught between shadow and flame. You taste honeyed ale passed in mugs, warming throats before another song begins. A peculiar debate exists among scholars about whether medieval villagers embellished tales to distract from hardship, or whether they preserved them faithfully across centuries. The truth likely lies between. Each teller shapes the tale, adding a wolf here, a saint's miracle there. Stories are alive, bending to the needs of listeners. Tonight, you see how a tale of hunger ends with laughter, how a legend of danger becomes reassurance. Flexibility itself is survival. The night grows late, but no one rises to leave. The storm outside is too fierce, the cold too sharp. Instead, the stories keep flowing. A girl tricking the devil by hiding in a barrel, a farmer saved by a crow that led him home through snow, a child who dreamed of fire and found spring had come early. Each tale is a thread woven into a tapestry of hope. One quirky practice catches your attention. Between stories, listeners sometimes spit into the fire. They believe this confuses evil spirits listening in, making them lose the thread of the tale. You watch sparks leap as spit hits flame, hear the hiss, see children giggle nervously. Even storytelling is armored against unseen dangers. As the final story winds down, silence settles. Only the crackle of embers remains. Children doze against their parents. Elders lean back, eyes heavy. The tales have done their work, not only filling time, but steadying hearts. The fear of wolves, the ache of hunger, the rasp of sickness, all are softened under the cloak of words. You step outside into the snow. The storm has eased. Stars prick the sky again. From behind each shutter, faint voices still murmur. Songs still hum. Tomorrow, you will walk into the last stretch of survival, when winter finally loosens its grip and thaw begins. But tonight, let the memory linger. A firelit circle, an elder's rough voice, children's wide eyes, songs rising soft against the storm. Stories here are not luxuries. They are warmth, just as vital as moss-stuffed walls or salted pork. In the coldest villages, words themselves are shelter. The murmur of stories still echoes in your mind as dawn spills faint light across the valley. Smoke rises slowly from crooked chimneys, curling into the pale sky. You sense something different in the air, not the biting, merciless edge of deep winter, but a hint of change. Snow still lies heavy, yet it softens at the edges. Icicles drip, water trickles faintly from eaves, and villagers step outside with cautious hope. Tonight, you witness the final act of survival, the thaw when endurance gives way to relief, and mountain people breathe again. You walk with them through the lanes. Everywhere, signs of spring creep in. Patches of earth peek through the snow, dark and wet. Birds return in small flocks, their calls sharp against the silence. Children point, laughing, as if seeing miracles. After months of white and grey, even the smallest green shoot feels like salvation. Historical accounts note that the first weeks of thaw were both joy and danger. Stored food often ran low by late winter, forcing families to ration tightly. The hunger gap, some chroniclers called it, the weeks when supplies dwindled, but fields were not yet yielding. For villagers, this time demanded one last stretch of discipline. They boiled thin soups from the final beans, scraped the last fat from barrels, and prayed for early warmth. Yet joy thrums in every detail. Farmers sharpen ploughs once more, testing blades in softening soil. Shepherds lead flocks cautiously from barns, the animals blinking at sunlight. Women spread cloths outdoors to air, letting smoke and dampness drift away. Every action carries relief, a sense that the worst has passed. You notice peculiar traditions marking this moment. In some villages, families poured melted snow onto fields as symbolic offerings, feeding the earth before planting. In others, children carried sticks adorned with ribbons, knocking on doors to chase away lingering winter spirits. Such rituals, half pagan, half Christian, symbolized renewal. Scholars debate whether they were superstitions or simply communal celebrations, perhaps both. Either way, they stitched meaning into change. The sensory world of Thor is vivid. You hear dripping water from roofs, a sound absent for months. You smell damp soil, sharp and earthy, breaking through the stale scent of smoke. You feel the warmth of sun on your face, faint but undeniable. The world itself exhales. One quirky tidbit lingers in alpine folklore. Villagers believed the first person to see a swallow in spring would have good fortune. Children ran outside daily, scanning skies, shouting with glee at the first sighting. You smile at the thought hope bound to a bird's wings. Scholars still discuss how much life truly eased at Thor. Some argue hunger was worse just before spring's bounty, making it bittersweet. Others insist the psychological lift of sun and green outweighed any scarcity. Watching tonight, you sense that both truths coexist. Stomachs may grumble, but hearts lighten. The sight of earth itself is enough to ease despair. You follow families into fields. They kneel, pressing fingers into mud, feeling readiness beneath. Prayers are murmured to saints of agriculture, sometimes mixed with older invocations to the land. Seeds are counted carefully, each one hope embodied. Villagers know not all will sprout, but they plant anyway, trusting earth as they trusted fire in winter. The sensory immersion is deep. Mud squelches underfoot, releasing an earthy smell. Sun warms your back, though wind still bites. Birds call sharply from trees, breaking the long silence. Children run, their feet splashing through meltwater, laughter carrying high. Survival is no longer about clinging, it is about beginning again. One unusual practice arises. Families often baked first loaves with the last of old grain, offering pieces to neighbors before sowing new. This gesture symbolized sharing scarcity to invite abundance. You taste a piece dense, coarse, but fragrant. It carries more meaning than flavor, a ritual bite linking old struggle to new promise. The scholarly debate continues. Did such rituals truly help crops grow, or were they psychological crutches? Perhaps the question misses the point. Rituals gave people the courage to endure one more season, and courage itself is a harvest. As dusk falls, the village gathers one last time by the chapel. Bells ring, not to warn or mourn, but to celebrate. Candles are lit, carried outside, their flames dancing against the twilight. Children wave them like stars. Elders smile with relief. The long night has ended. Survival has become renewal. You step back, watching the scene. Huts patched with moss and clay, storerooms nearly empty, barns scarred by wolves but still standing, families weary but alive. All winter they fought with salt, fire, herbs, prayers and stories. Now, as earth softens and sky brightens, you see their triumph. Not victory over nature, but harmony with it. A partnership in hardship, acceptance that life is fragile, yet endures. The wind carries scents of damp soil and smoke, mingling like memory. The bells toll softer now. Children's laughter trails into evening. You know the story does not end here. Summer will bring toil. Autumn will demand storage. Winter will return. Yet for tonight, peace rests over the village. And so your journey closes. You have walked through their huts, felt their fires, tasted their salted pork, heard their songs, and trembled at their wolves. You have seen how moss and dung became walls, how stories became warmth, how faith and superstition intertwined. Survival here was not heroic, not grand. It was daily, humble, layered like clay on beams, like snow on roofs. And it was enough. Now, as you settle into your own quiet room, let the imagery soften. Imagine the snow melting slowly, dripping into little rivulets that sparkle under early Sunday. Picture villagers breathing easier, shoulders lighter, eyes lifted to new horizons. The harsh winds ease, replaced by breezes carrying scents of thawing earth. The howls of wolves fade, and in their place come bird calls, tentative yet certain. Let your mind drift back to the firelit hut where stories flowed. Hear the rough but steady voices weaving legends, the crackle of the hearth, the hum of lullabies. Picture children curled in blankets, safe at last. Their breathing even. The long winter has passed for them, just as your long day now fades into night. With each breath, you too can release the weight of worry. Inhale the warmth of fires well tended. Exhale the chill of storms survived. You are safe. You are sheltered. Like those villagers, you carry resilience in your bones, endurance in your heart. Time itself becomes gentle now. No counting sticks, no saints' days, no anxious waiting for thaw. Just the present moment, calm, steady, suffused with quiet. Imagine moss-lined walls holding you safe, soft earth beneath, stars steady above. Imagine the weight of blankets, the rhythm of your own breath. As the final bells fade in your mind, so too may your thoughts settle. Let them drift like smoke rising from a chimney, curling into the dark, vanishing into quiet. The night is here to hold you, steady and soft. Rest now, with peace in your chest, warmth in your limbs, and stories in your dreams. Sweet dreams.